My name is Pearl Kelly, and I am 31 years old. The wind coming off the Minnesota plains was 4 degrees below zero. I shifted the weight of my 10-month-old son on my hip. My right boot sank into a slush puddle hidden beneath the snow. Freezing water soaked through the canvas, stopping only when it hit the plastic grocery bags I had tied over my socks before leaving the house. I work as a healthcare compliance auditor. I map hospital budgets for a living. I earn $85,000 a year. Yet here I was, walking down the shoulder of County Road 9 like a fugitive because my mother-in-law decided I needed to be punished. It happened yesterday afternoon. I walked into my own kitchen holding 3 cans of store-brand baby formula. Brenda was sitting at the island. She inspected the labels, pressed her mouth into a thin line, and informed me her grandson would only drink the organic European brand. When I told her the nutritional profile was identical and it cost $20 less a can, she held out her hand. She demanded my car keys. I looked at my husband, Greg. He was leaning against the refrigerator, scrolling on his phone. He did not even look up. He said, "Hand them over, Pearl. You need to learn respect. Mom is just looking out for Leo." Welcome to Luke Vengeance, the channel where we tell real stories about family betrayal and the quiet calculations that bring them down. Tell me in the comments, how old are you? And has anyone ever tried to strip away your autonomy, disguised as family love? Drop your age below and subscribe, because the way I shut down their operation is something you will want to hear. Now back to the road. I handed the keys over because fighting Brenda meant fighting Greg, and I did not have the energy for a two-front war. They assumed taking my Honda would ground me, trap me in the house until I broke down and apologized. They miscalculated. Leo spiked a fever this morning. The infant medicine bottle was empty. I did not ask Greg for a ride. I did not call Brenda to beg for my own vehicle. I bundled my son, wrapped my feet in plastic, and started walking toward the pharmacy 6 miles away. Headlights cut through the gray afternoon light behind me. A silver Ford F-150 slowed down, its heavy tires crunching on the salted shoulder. I recognized the grill guard. The truck idled a few feet away, and the passenger window rolled down. Warm air blasted out, smelling of black coffee and spearmint gum. My father, Jim, leaned across the center console. He spent 30 years as a logistics manager retrieving missing freight across the Midwest. He processed the scene in under 3 seconds. The pale color of my face, Leo shivering against my chest, the limp in my stride. "Get in," he said. I opened the heavy door and climbed into the passenger seat, maneuvering Leo onto my lap. The heat washing over us felt like a physical weight. I unzipped the snowsuit to let him breathe. My father put the truck in drive but kept his foot on the brake. His hands gripped the steering wheel. He did not yell. He did not punch the dashboard. Jim was a man whose anger was always cold, quiet, and practical. "Where is the Honda?" he asked. His eyes remained fixed on the icy road ahead. "Brenda took it," I said. My teeth chattered as the adrenaline began to fade. "I bought the wrong formula." Greg said I needed to learn respect. Jim processed the information. He checked his rearview mirror, flipped his turn signal, and pulled the truck back onto the highway. "Take me to the pharmacy on Elm," I said, rubbing Leo on the back. "He needs medicine." "I have a sealed bottle in the glove box," Jim said. His voice was flat. "Bought it when I saw the snow coming." I opened the compartment, found the medicine, and gave a dose to Leo. His whimpers settled into soft breathing. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window, waiting for my father to turn the truck around toward my house. I braced myself for the confrontation. I pictured Jim kicking in Greg's front door, demanding the keys to my car. But Jim did not take the exit for my neighborhood. He merged onto the interstate, heading toward the commercial district. I sat up straight. "Dad, where are we going?" "You do not negotiate with someone holding your property hostage, Pearl," Jim said. "You audit them." He bypassed my street, bypassed the pharmacy, and pulled into the snow-cleared parking lot of the First National Bank. He threw the truck into park and turned the engine off. "Grab the baby," he instructed. "We are pulling your financials." My name is Pearl Kelly, and I am 31 years old. The wind coming off the Minnesota plains was 4 degrees below zero. I shifted the weight of my 10-month-old son on my hip. My right boot sank into a slush puddle hidden beneath the snow. Freezing water soaked through the canvas, stopping only when it hit the plastic grocery bags I had tied over my socks before leaving the house. I work as a healthcare compliance auditor. I map hospital budgets for a living. I earn $85,000 a year. Yet here I was, walking down the shoulder of County Road 9 like a fugitive because my mother-in-law decided I needed to be punished. It happened yesterday afternoon. I walked into my own kitchen holding 3 cans of store-brand baby formula. Brenda was sitting at the island. She inspected the labels, pressed her mouth into a thin line, and informed me her grandson would only drink the organic European brand. When I told her the nutritional profile was identical and it cost $20 less a can, she held out her hand. She demanded my car keys. I looked at my husband, Greg. He was leaning against the refrigerator, scrolling on his phone. He did not even look up. He said, "Hand them over, Pearl. You need to learn respect. Mom is just looking out for Leo." Welcome to Luke Vengeance, the channel where we tell real stories about family betrayal and the quiet calculations that bring them down. Tell me in the comments, how old are you? And has anyone ever tried to strip away your autonomy disguised as family love? Drop your age below and subscribe, because the way I shut down their operation is something you will want to hear. Now back to the road. I handed the keys over because fighting Brenda meant fighting Greg, and I did not have the energy for a two-front war. They assumed taking my Honda would ground me, trap me in the house until I broke down and apologized. They miscalculated. Leo spiked a fever this morning. The infant medicine bottle was empty. I did not ask Greg for a ride. I did not call Brenda to beg for my own vehicle. I bundled my son, wrapped my feet in plastic, and started walking toward the pharmacy 6 miles away. Headlights cut through the gray afternoon light behind me. A silver Ford F-150 slowed down, its heavy tires crunching on the salted shoulder. I recognized the grill guard. The truck idled a few feet away, and the passenger window rolled down. Warm air blasted out, smelling of black coffee and spearmint gum. My father, Jim, leaned across the center console. He spent 30 years as a logistics manager, retrieving missing freight across the Midwest. He processed the scene in under 3 seconds. The pale color of my face, Leo shivering against my chest, the limp in my stride. "Get in," he said. I opened the heavy door and climbed into the passenger seat, maneuvering Leo onto my lap. The heat washing over us felt like a physical weight. I unzipped the snowsuit to let him breathe. My father put the truck in drive but kept his foot on the brake. His hands gripped the steering wheel. He did not yell. He did not punch the dashboard. Jim was a man whose anger was always cold, quiet, and practical. "Where is the Honda?" he asked. His eyes remained fixed on the icy road ahead. "Brenda took it," I said. My teeth chattered as the adrenaline began to fade. "I bought the wrong formula. Greg said I needed to learn respect." Jim processed the information. He checked his rearview mirror, flipped his turn signal, and pulled the truck back onto the highway. "Take me to the pharmacy on Elm," I said, rubbing Leo on the back. "He needs medicine." "I have a sealed bottle in the glove box," Jim said. His voice was flat. "Bought it when I saw the snow coming." I opened the compartment, found the medicine, and gave a dose to Leo. His whimpers settled into soft breathing. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window, waiting for my father to turn the truck around toward my house. I braced myself for the confrontation. I pictured Jim kicking in Greg's front door, demanding the keys to my car. But Jim did not take the exit for my neighborhood. He merged onto the interstate, heading toward the commercial district. I sat up straight. "Dad, where are we going?" "You do not negotiate with someone holding your property hostage, Pearl," Jim said. "You audit them." He bypassed my street, bypassed the pharmacy, and pulled into the snow-cleared parking lot of the First National Bank. He threw the truck into park and turned the engine off. "Grab the baby," he instructed. "We are pulling your financials." The automatic doors of First National Bank parted. The rush of heated air hit my face, carrying the scent of industrial floor wax and old coffee. I followed Jim past the velvet ropes of the standard teller line. He did not stop to wait. He walked directly toward the glass-walled offices in the back, the ones reserved for account managers and loan officers. My boots squeaked on the polished tile. The plastic grocery bags wrapped around my socks left wet footprints across the lobby. People stared. A woman in a tailored wool coat paused mid-step to look at my feet, then at the baby resting on my hip. I kept my chin level and my eyes forward. Jim knocked once on the doorframe of an office belonging to a woman with a brass nameplate that read Diane. Diane looked up from her keyboard, annoyance flashing across her features, before she registered my father. She knew Jim. Everyone in town who handled logistics or corporate accounts knew Jim. "We need a full transactional history printed right now," my father said. "Every deposit, every withdrawal, every routing transfer for the past 18 months. Diane glanced at me. Her professional smile faltered. She took in the damp hem of my jeans, the pale exhaustion in my face, and the red flush on Leo's cheeks. The corporate script vanished from her eyes, replaced by a sudden, quiet maternal instinct. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a cherry lollipop with a white paper stick. She unwrapped it and handed it to me. "For the baby," she said. Her voice was gentle. "And maybe take a seat, honey. You look like you are about to fall over." I took the lollipop. My fingers brushed against hers. That tiny, unremarkable gesture of human kindness did something to me. My chest tightened. A sharp, burning ache rushed up my throat. I had spent the last 10 months living in a house where every action was scrutinized, where my own mother-in-law confiscated my vehicle over a brand of formula, and where my husband treated my distress as an inconvenience. A stranger offering a piece of candy was the closest thing to care I had experienced in almost a year. My stoic facade fractured. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I blinked hard, swallowed the lump in my throat, and handed the candy to Leo. I sat down in the leather guest chair. I could not afford to fall apart. Not yet. Diane turned to her monitor. "I need your ID and the account numbers," she said. I handed her my driver license. I recited the primary checking account number from memory. For the past year, Greg had managed our finances through a budgeting app on his phone. He told me it was easier that way. He said my postpartum depression made me scattered bad with numbers and prone to anxiety. He volunteered to take the mental load off my plate. I let him. I let him because I was tired, and because a marriage is supposed to be a partnership built on trust. The laser printer in the corner of the office spun up. The mechanical hum filled the small room. I closed my eyes and listened to the paper sliding through the rollers. The sound pulled me backward in time, dropping me straight into the sterile, unforgiving light of a hospital recovery room. It was 10 months ago. I was lying in a narrow bed 24 hours after an emergency cesarean section. The pain radiating from my lower abdomen felt like hot wire. The IV line taped to the back of my hand pulled at my skin every time I moved. My bloodstream was thick with heavy narcotics. I could barely keep my eyes open. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, rhythmic tempo. Greg walked into the room carrying a manila clipboard. He smelled of fresh snow and hospital cafeteria coffee. He sat on the edge of my bed, kissing my forehead. He stroked my hair, telling me how brave I was, how beautiful our new son looked in the nursery. Then he placed the clipboard on my lap and handed me a blue ballpoint pen. "Just some hospital billing forms, babe," he whispered, his voice smooth and reassuring. "The administration office needs them signed before they process the insurance claim. Mom and I are handling all the paperwork, so you can just sleep. You do not need to worry about a thing. I have got you." I could not read the fine print. The words blurred together under the fluorescent ceiling lights. I trusted the man holding my hand. I trusted the father of the child I had just brought into the world. I signed my name on the lines he pointed to. 1, 2, 3 signatures. He took the clipboard, kissed my cheek again, and let me drift back into the dark, heavy sleep of recovery. Diane placed a thick stack of warm printed pages on the glass desk, snapping me back to the present. "Here is the 18-month history," she said. Jim pulled a chair up next to mine. We leaned over the documents. My father did not say a word. He just watched me. This was the moment the exhausted, bullied wife retreated, and the healthcare compliance auditor took the wheel. I look at financial ledgers for a living. I track phantom costs, ghost billing, and structural deficits in medical networks. Numbers are a language I speak fluently. They do not lie. They do not gaslight. They simply reveal the structure of reality. I traced my index finger down the first column. There was my biweekly paycheck. After taxes and benefits, a substantial sum of money hit the primary checking account every other Friday. I followed the row across the page. Exactly 48 hours after my deposit cleared, a scheduled automated wire transfer swept 90% of my earnings out of the account. It left just enough behind to cover basic groceries and a fraction of the utility bills. "Where's the sweep going?" I asked. My voice dropped an octave, losing the tremble it had on the highway. Diane typed on her keyboard. "It routes to a secondary joint account ending in 4402. I recognized the last 4 digits. Greg told me that account was our dedicated mortgage and property tax holding fund. He told me it was locked to prevent accidental overdrafts. I flipped to the next page of the printout, scanning the ledger for account 4402. The money arrived there, but it did not stay. The mortgage was being paid, yes, but thousands of dollars of my remaining income were being siphoned off in secondary outward wire transfers. $500 here, $1,200 there, $3,000 at the end of the month. The recipient for every single transfer was listed as a corporate entity, Golden Horizons LLC. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. I read the name 3 times. I had never heard of Golden Horizons. I had no contracts with them. I held no shares in them. "Dad," I said, pointing to the line item, "look at this." Jim pulled his reading glasses from his shirt pocket. He stared at the corporate name. Without a word, he took his smartphone from his jacket. His thumb moved quickly across the screen. He bypassed a standard search engine and logged directly into the Minnesota Secretary of State Business Registry portal. He typed the name of the LLC into the search bar. The loading icon spun for 2 seconds before the corporate charter populated on his screen. He slid the phone across the glass desk, placing it right on top of the bank statements. Registered Agent Jim read aloud, "Brenda Kelly, filing date 11 months ago." The air in the office seemed to stop moving. The lingering chill from my wet socks vanished, replaced by a different kind of cold. A clinical, calculating freeze settled into my bones. The puzzle pieces snapped together with violent clarity. Brenda did not take my car keys because she cared about organic formula. Greg did not lock down our finances because he was worried about my postpartum anxiety. He did not hand me those papers in the hospital to help me rest. I had not been merely manipulated. I had not just been emotionally bullied by a toxic mother-in-law and an enabling husband. I had been systematically and legally defrauded. They had built a pipeline directly into my livelihood. I was funding Brenda's lifestyle. I was paying for the very power she used to crush me. My posture shifted. I sat up straight, rolling my shoulders back. The weight of the victimhood slid off my back, leaving only the sharp, unyielding edge of an auditor who has just found the missing funds. You do not cry over a fraudulent ledger. You dismantle it. Deep inside my coat pocket, my cell phone vibrated. A short, sharp buzz. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a text message from Greg. "Mom is coming over for dinner tonight. You need to apologize for the formula incident so you can have your car back. Do not make this hard, Pearl." I stared at the words. 2 hours ago, that text would have sent my heart rate spiking. I would have felt the familiar suffocating pressure of being trapped. I would have drafted 5 different apologies trying to find the one that would appease them the fastest. Now, I just saw a pair of thieves getting comfortable at the scene of the crime. I unlocked the screen. My thumbs moved across the digital keyboard with steady, rhythmic precision. I did not type out my anger. I did not demand answers about Golden Horizons. You never tip off the target before the audit is complete. "I will make it right," I typed. I hit send, placed the phone back in my pocket, and looked up at my father. We had work to do. My father parked his silver truck 3 blocks away from my neighborhood. The engine idled, sending a steady plume of white exhaust into the freezing evening air. Jim reached into the center console and handed me a small metallic object. It was a high-capacity solid-state flash drive. He told me the financial ledgers from the bank only showed where the money went. We needed the internal documents to prove how they authorized the theft. I took the drive, slipped it deep into my coat pocket, and opened the passenger door. I had to walk the remaining distance to the house. If Greg or Brenda saw my father drop me off, the illusion of my isolation would shatter. I needed them to believe the 6-mile trek broke my spirit. The snow was falling heavier now, coating the sidewalks in a fresh layer of white. I adjusted Leo against my chest and began the final march. The cold bit into my face, but the internal chill from the bank office remained. I was no longer a frantic, exhausted mother trying to appease her in-laws. I was an auditor stepping onto a hostile site. I approached the 2-story craftsman-style home. I had purchased this property with my own savings 3 years before Greg and I ever got engaged. My name was on the original deed. Yet standing on the front porch, I felt like a trespasser in a domain controlled by someone else. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Warm air rushed over me, carrying the rich scent of roasting chicken and garlic. I unzipped Leo from his snowsuit and set him gently in his playpen in the corner of the living room. I took off my wet coat and removed the plastic bags from my freezing feet. I walked into the kitchen. Brenda stood by the stove holding a wooden spoon, inspecting the contents of a simmering pot. Greg sat at the large marble island. His laptop was open in front of him. His fingers tapped lazily on the trackpad. The very machine containing the architecture of my stolen life rested right out in the open. He glanced up as I entered. He did not ask if Leo was feeling better. He did not ask if I was cold. He simply looked at the wall clock, noting my time of arrival, and went back to scrolling. I washed my hands at the sink, letting the hot water bring the feeling back to my numb fingers. I needed to integrate myself into the routine. I picked up a chef knife and pulled a cutting board toward me. I grabbed a handful of peeled carrots and began slicing them for the side dish. My cuts were rhythmic and even. Brenda set her spoon down. She walked over and stood uncomfortably close to my shoulder. She watched the blade move up and down. She reached out and placed her hand over mine, stopping the knife. She told me I was holding the handle wrong. She said I was cutting the pieces too thick and they would never cook evenly for her grandson to eat. She slid the knife out of my grip and demonstrated the correct technique, her voice dripping with condescension. It was a tiny surgical strike, a microaggression designed to establish territorial dominance in my own kitchen. Before the revelation at the bank, a moment like this would have made my chest tight. I would have felt the familiar sting of inadequacy. Now I saw the interaction through a clinical lens. Brenda needed to control the carrots because controlling the small things distracted from the theft of the large things. It was a cheap magic trick. I nodded slowly. I told her she was right. I thanked her for showing me. I took the knife back and adjusted my grip to match hers. I sliced the vegetables thinner. Brenda smiled satisfied with my swift submission and returned to her pot. We sat down at the dining room table 20 minutes later. The food was plated. The air in the room was thick, heavy, with the silent expectation of my surrender. Greg picked up his fork, waiting for me to initiate the dialogue. Brenda cut her chicken, refusing to make eye contact. I prepared my performance. I needed to give them exactly what they craved so they would drop their guard. I lowered my head, staring at the grain of the wooden table. I let a slight tremor enter my voice. I told them the long walk and the freezing cold gave me a lot of time to reflect on my behavior. I said I was wrong to argue about the baby formula. I admitted that my postpartum emotions had been making me difficult to deal with, and I appreciated them stepping in to manage things. Greg paused his chewing. His posture shifted. He leaned back in his chair, his chest expanding as he soaked in the validation. Brenda finally looked at me, a gleam of triumph in her eyes. But an apology was not enough. I needed to push them over the edge of complacency. I needed to offer them a trophy. I looked up, letting my eyes shine with unshed tears. I turned to Greg, and told him I wanted to prove my dedication to this family. I brought up Brenda's upcoming 60th birthday party, scheduled for the following month. I suggested that her milestone celebration would be the perfect venue for Greg and I to renew our wedding vows. I painted a picture of a grand public display of family unity in front of all her high society friends. I offered to cater the entire event myself as a gesture of my commitment. The psychological bait worked perfectly. Greg's face softened into a smug, victorious grin. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, telling me he knew I would eventually come to my senses. Brenda practically glowed. The idea of hosting a lavish party where her daughter-in-law publicly pledged submission fed her ego beyond measure. The tension in the dining room evaporated. They believed they had won the war. They believed the animal was broken. Dinner concluded in a state of relaxed victory. Greg carried his empty plate to the sink. He left his laptop sitting open on the kitchen island. The screen remained awake, displaying his email inbox. He turned and walked into the living room, slumping onto the leather sofa next to Brenda. He picked up the remote control and turned on the television. The loud, booming voices of football announcers filled the first floor. I stood at the kitchen sink, turning the faucet on. I ran hot water over the ceramic plates, letting the splashing sound cover my movements. My heart began to beat in a slow, calculated rhythm. I dried my hands thoroughly on a dish towel. I stepped away from the sink and moved to the edge of the marble island. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver flash drive. My eyes darted toward the living room archway. The back of Greg's head was visible over the top of the sofa. He was entirely focused on the game. I slid the metal drive into the port on the side of the laptop. The system chimed softly, recognizing the device. I opened the file explorer. Greg was not a sophisticated criminal. He did not use encrypted partitions or hidden directories. He relied entirely on my blind trust and my exhaustion. I clicked into his primary documents folder. I found a master directory labeled Finances 2024. I clicked and dragged the entire folder onto the flash drive icon. A small dialog box popped up in the center of the screen. It calculated the data size, 4 gigabytes. The green progress bar appeared and it began to crawl forward, 10%. The television went to a commercial break. A loud advertisement for pickup trucks echoed through the house. I watched the green line fill the digital box, 20%. I heard Greg shift his weight on the leather sofa. The cushions squeaked. I kept my hand hovering over the keyboard, ready to close the window. 40%. The water was still running in the sink behind me. 60%. Footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor, heavy, dragging steps. Greg was getting up. He was coming back into the kitchen for a beer. 80%. His shadow fell across the hallway wall, growing larger as he approached the archway. He was 3 seconds away. 95%. The green bar hit the edge. The copy completed. The dialog box vanished from the screen. I grabbed the silver casing of the flash drive and yanked it out of the port. In the same fluid, unbroken motion, I slid the drive down the collar of my shirt, tucking the cold metal securely into my bra. I grabbed a sponge and pivoted back toward the sink just as Greg rounded the corner. He opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle, and walked back to the game without casting a single glance in my direction. I let out a slow, controlled breath. But the adrenaline surging through my veins did not fade. Before I had turned away from the laptop, just before I pulled the drive, my eyes had scanned the loose files sitting outside the main financial folder. One specific document title had burned itself into my retinas. It was a single digital file sitting plainly on his desktop. Power of Attorney, Kelly. I stood on the freezing corner outside the hospital administration building, waiting for my lunch hour to begin. The midday sun offered no warmth against the Minnesota winter. I pulled my wool scarf tighter around my neck, watching the traffic flow past the snowbanks. A silver Ford truck pulled up to the curb. I opened the heavy passenger door and climbed inside, bringing a rush of frigid air with me. Jim did not say a word. He merged back into the traffic lanes, steering us away from the commercial district toward the industrial edge of town. We parked behind a faded brick diner that catered mostly to long-haul truckers and warehouse workers. The interior smelled of old frying grease, sharp bleach, and dark roast coffee. We chose a booth in the far back corner, isolated from the sparse lunchtime crowd. The cracked red vinyl squeaked under my weight. A waitress dropped off 2 ceramic mugs of black coffee and walked away without asking for our order. Jim unzipped his canvas messenger bag and pulled out a rugged black laptop. He set it on the laminate table, shielding the screen from the rest of the room. I reached inside my coat, retrieved the silver flash drive, and handed it across the table. My father inserted the device. The operating system chimed. He opened the file directory I had stolen from Greg the night before. Row after row of digital folders populated the screen. We bypassed the standard banking ledgers. We already knew where the swept funds were going. We needed to understand the legal mechanism they used to hijack the accounts in the first place. I leaned forward, wrapping my cold hands around the coffee mug. Open the loose file on the desktop, I instructed. The one labeled Power of Attorney, Kelly. Jim maneuvered the cursor and double-clicked the PDF icon. The document loaded. The harsh white background of the scanned page illuminated our faces. It was a standard Minnesota statutory short form power of attorney. The legal text was dense, filled with clauses granting sweeping, unrestricted authority over real estate transactions, banking operations, and personal property management. I scanned the top section. Greg was listed as the attorney in fact. I was listed as the principal. My eyes dropped to the justification clause typed into the addendum. The text stated that the principal was medically incapacitated due to severe documented postpartum depression and acute psychological instability. It granted my husband total, unilateral control over my financial existence, stripping away my agency under the guise of medical necessity. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. Greg had weaponized my vulnerability. He used the exhaustion and hormonal shifts of childbirth to construct a legal narrative painting me as an unfit, hysterical woman incapable of managing her own life. Scroll down to the signature line, I said. My voice sounded hollow, echoing in my own ears. Jim scrolled to the bottom of the second page. There was my signature written in blue ink. It was sloppy, trailing off at the end, lacking my usual sharp precision. I stared at the strokes of the pen. Beside the signature sat the date of execution. I stopped breathing. The air in the diner seemed to evaporate. I looked at the date again. I cross-referenced it in my mind. It was not just a random Tuesday. It was the exact day I gave birth to Leo. The sterile hospital room rushed back into my memory. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The narcotic fog clouding my vision. Greg sitting on the edge of the mattress, smelling of cafeteria coffee, handing me a clipboard. Just some hospital billing forms, he had whispered. The administration office needs them signed. He slipped a total surrender of my civil rights into a stack of medical paperwork while I was recovering from abdominal surgery. He planned it, I whispered, staring at the screen. He brought the printed document to the maternity ward. He watched me undergo a major operation, and his first thought was asset acquisition. Jim tightened his jaw. The muscles in his neck jumped. He did not offer empty comfort. He simply hit the back button, returning to the main folder directory. We have the mechanism, my father said. Now we find out what he did with it. He opened a subfolder titled Vehicle Assets. Inside sat a scanned copy of the title to my Honda SUV, the car I had paid off 2 years before the wedding. The car Brenda confiscated from me 24 hours ago. I read the transfer line. The vehicle was no longer registered in my name. Greg had used the fraudulent power of attorney to sign the title over to Brenda. But they did not stop at theft. They moved to leverage. Below the title sat a loan origination agreement from a regional credit union. Brenda had pledged the Honda as physical collateral to secure a personal line of credit. The approved loan amount was $40,000. I read the disbursement details. The funds were routed directly to a local contracting firm specializing in luxury home renovations. Brenda used my stolen car to finance a $40,000 remodel of her finished basement. I sat back against the vinyl booth. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. While I was wrapping my feet in plastic grocery bags to walk through the snow for infant medicine, my mother-in-law was selecting premium drywall and custom lighting fixtures using my equity. This was no longer a marital dispute. It was not a toxic family dynamic. It was an orchestrated, multi-tiered financial felony. My professional instincts, honed by years of compliance auditing, took over. To execute a document this consequential, to bypass the banking security protocols for a title transfer and a collateralized loan, they needed more than just a forged signature. Look at the bottom corner of the power of attorney, I pointed at the screen. Jim zoomed in on the document. Beside my sloppy hospital signature rested a circular embossed stamp. A state-commissioned notary public had verified my identity and sworn, under penalty of perjury, that I was of sound mind when signing the document. But the ink from the scan was slightly degraded. The name on the notary seal was blurred, illegible on the digital copy. A bank will not process a power of attorney without verifying the notary credential, I explained. They need an impartial, state-licensed witness. Whoever stamped that page is an accessory to fraud. If we prove the notary lied, the entire document collapses. The title transfer becomes invalid. The loan becomes unsecured. The whole operation burns to the ground. Jim stared at the blurry black circle. He closed the laptop. He pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket and stood up. I have a contact in the county clerk office, he said. He owes me a favor from a freight dispute 5 years ago. Order me a black coffee. I need to make a call. He walked out the front door of the diner, stepping into the freezing wind. I watched him through the large plate glass window. He paced back and forth across the salted concrete, his breath turning to white vapor as he spoke into the receiver. Inside the diner, the waitress dropped off a fresh pot of coffee. I poured a cup for my father, watching the dark liquid fill the ceramic mug. 10 minutes passed. The lunch rush began to filter in, filling the neighboring booths with men in high-visibility work jackets. I kept my eyes on Jim. He stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still, listening intently to whatever the clerk on the other end of the line was saying. He ended the call, shoved the phone back into his pocket, and walked back through the diner doors. He slid into the booth across from me. He did not reach for his coffee. He looked directly into my eyes. The cold calculation in his gaze had sharpened into something far more dangerous. The clerk pulled the hard copy from the public registry, Jim said. His voice was low, cutting through the background clatter of silverware and diner conversation. He ran the commission number on the stamp. Who was it? I asked. Jim leaned forward, resting his forearms on the laminate table. It was not a stranger Pearl. The man who swore he watched you sign away your life, the man who finalized the theft of your property, is your husband's cousin, Derek. I stared at my father, letting the reality of the name wash over me. Derek was a licensed real estate broker who frequently attended our holiday dinners. He had eaten food I cooked. He had held my son. This was not isolated to Greg and Brenda. The corruption ran through the bloodline. The conspiracy was a family affair. I returned to the house after my meeting with Jim at the diner. I walked through the front door and hung my coat on the brass hook in the hallway. My mind was a steel trap. The knowledge of the forged power of attorney and the stolen $40,000 fundamentally altered my internal architecture. I had to maintain the illusion of a broken, subservient wife, but I could no longer manufacture the desperate anxiety Greg expected to see. I did not flinch when he dropped his keys on the kitchen counter that evening. I did not rush to offer him a plate of hot food. I moved with quiet, calculated efficiency. Greg noticed. A man who builds a prison out of emotional manipulation pays close attention to the behavior of his captive. He expects tears. He expects pleading. When he receives flat compliance instead, his instinct is to tighten the chains. The next morning, I woke up shivering. I pulled the heavy down comforter up to my chin. The air in the bedroom was biting. I swung my legs out of bed and felt the icy hardwood floor against my bare feet. I walked into the hallway and checked the smart thermostat mounted on the wall. The digital display glowed a stark white against the gray paint. The target temperature was locked at 60 degrees. A tiny padlock icon sat in the upper right corner of the screen. Greg had logged into the primary control application on his phone and changed the master passcode. He had weaponized the climate control system of my own home. I wrapped a thick fleece robe around my shoulders and walked downstairs. I headed into the living room to check the weather forecast on the television. I reached for the remote control, but my eyes caught an empty space on the glass shelf of the entertainment center. The black, rectangular internet router was missing. A tangle of disconnected Ethernet cables lay on the floor. Resting on the glass was a square, yellow sticky note. Taking the router to the office for a firmware update. Focus on the baby today. Stay offline and think about your priorities. He thought he had paralyzed me. He believed that stripping away my vehicle, plunging the house into near-freezing temperatures, and cutting off my digital connection to the outside world would finally break my spirit. He wanted me stranded, isolated, and entirely dependent on his mercy. It was a classic siege tactic. But Greg underestimated the preparation of a healthcare compliance auditor. He did not know about the supply drop Jim had orchestrated. I walked into the laundry room and opened the bottom cabinet. Hidden beneath a stack of folded winter blankets was a waterproof, matte black plastic case. I pulled it out, unlatched the heavy clasps, and opened the lid. Inside rested a brand new cellular-enabled tablet and a prepaid burner smartphone. Jim had purchased them with cash the previous afternoon. They operated on an independent cellular network, completely bypassing the absent router in my living room. I carried the devices to the kitchen table. I brewed a cup of hot tea, letting the steam warm my face. The isolation Greg engineered to punish me instantly became my greatest tactical advantage. There would be no sudden emails popping up on a shared local network. There would be no browser history for him to monitor. There were no digital footprints left behind on a shared router log. I had total, uninterrupted silence to build my case. I spent the next 3 hours organizing the financial ledgers and the forged legal documents into secure, encrypted cloud folders. I drafted a timeline of the fraud, plotting the date of the hospital signature against the title transfer and the credit union loan disbursement. I functioned like a ghost inside my own freezing house. At noon, the front door unlocked. Brenda walked in wearing a heavy wool coat and leather gloves. She did not take off her outerwear. She walked past the kitchen without offering a greeting and headed straight up the stairs to the nursery to check on Leo. I remained at the kitchen table sipping my tea. I did not follow her. I did not need to. 3 weeks prior, Brenda had stood over the crib in that exact room, flicking her manicured fingernail against the white plastic casing of the baby monitor I had purchased. She had wrinkled her nose, calling it a cheap piece of plastic. She had loudly declared it was unworthy of her grandson, insisting Greg buy a premium model. What Brenda did not know was that I had taken her criticism as an opportunity. I had kept the cheap plastic outer shell, but I had gutted the internal components. I replaced the generic camera with a high-definition wide-angle lens. I installed an ambient noise amplifier, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. Most importantly, I integrated an independent cellular uplink chip. The monitor did not rely on local internet. It streamed audio and video directly to a private, secure cloud server using a dedicated data plan. Greg and Brenda believed the house was entirely offline. They thought the digital blackout provided them with an impenetrable shield of privacy. Because they believed no one could hear them, their arrogance made them careless. At 4 o'clock, Greg came home early from the office. He walked straight upstairs to join his mother in the nursery. They closed the heavy wooden door behind them. I stayed in the kitchen. I washed the dishes. I wiped down the marble countertops. I performed the menial tasks of domestic servitude, perfectly content to let them conspire in what they assumed was a secure room. Hours later, the house was dark. Greg was asleep in the master bedroom, his breathing deep and rhythmic. I lay perfectly still beside him, the heavy duvet pulled up over my head to block the ambient light. The burner tablet was in my hands. The screen brightness was turned all the way down. I inserted a single wireless earbud into my right ear. I accessed the hidden cloud server and pulled up the audio logs captured from the nursery that afternoon. The file buffered for a second before the sound began to play. The audio quality was terrifyingly crisp. I heard the creak of the rocking chair as Brenda sat down. I heard Greg pacing across the carpeted floor. "She is quiet today," Greg said. His voice echoed slightly in the small room. I took the router. I froze the house. She did not even complain when I got home. I think she is finally giving up. "Do not let up the pressure," Brenda replied. Her tone was sharp, devoid of any grandmotherly warmth. "The silence just means she is exhausted. Keep her off balance until the paperwork is filed. If she has the energy to fight back, this whole thing gets complicated." I heard the rustle of fabric as Greg leaned against the changing table. "I have the documentation ready," Greg said. I logged her erratic behavior, the crying spells, the fact that she walked 6 miles in the snow with an infant. It establishes a clear pattern of mental instability. A cold chill swept over my skin that had nothing to do with the temperature of the bedroom. They were building a psychological profile. They were manufacturing a narrative of maternal incompetence. "Did you confirm the timeline with Derek?" Brenda asked. "Yes," Greg answered. "Derek has the stamp ready, but we cannot execute the final signature until we have the property valuation." "Did you schedule the appraisal for next week?" "Yes," Brenda said. "Thursday at noon. Make sure she is out of the house. Send her to the grocery store or tell her to take the baby to the park. The appraiser needs unrestricted access to measure the square footage. We need the exact market valuation before we file the deed." I hit the pause button on the tablet screen. The recording stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud enough that I feared Greg might hear it in his sleep. I stared into the dark space under the blanket. The pieces of the conversation slammed together, forming a picture far more sinister than stolen money. Why did they need a property valuation? Why was Derek preparing another fraudulent notary stamp? Why were they building a psychological profile depicting me as an unstable mother? They were not just planning to steal my income. They were preparing to steal the house I owned before the marriage. And they were going to use my manufactured mental collapse to take custody of my son. I lay under the heavy duvet long after the audio recording finished playing. The dark space surrounding me felt entirely different now. It was no longer a refuge from a freezing bedroom. It felt like a casket. I took the wireless earbud out of my ear. My fingers were slick with cold sweat. I listened to Greg breathing on the other side of the mattress. A man who could sleep that deeply while orchestrating the destruction of his wife possessed a psychology I could barely comprehend. The missing vehicle, the locked thermostat, the confiscated internet router. I had analyzed those actions as bullying tactics. I thought they were instruments of control designed to force an apology. I was wrong. They were not punishments. They were stage props. Greg and Brenda were actively manufacturing an environment to support a clinical diagnosis. I stayed awake until dawn watching the gray winter light bleed through the window blinds. At 6 a.m, Greg's alarm went off. I closed my eyes and regulated my breathing, feigning deep sleep. I listened to his morning routine, the shower running, the closet door opening, the jingle of his keys on the kitchen counter downstairs. The front door clicked shut. The deadbolt engaged. I sat up. The house was empty. I retrieved the silver flash drive from its hiding spot inside a hollowed-out winter boot in the back of my closet. I walked into the kitchen and retrieved the cellular tablet Jim had provided. Using a small digital adapter, I connected the flash drive to the device. The screen illuminated, displaying the copied contents of Greg's computer. I needed hard evidence of the conversation I heard on the nursery monitor. I needed to see the paperwork. I bypassed the banking folders we had already audited at the diner. I clicked into a directory labeled System Cash. When I initiated the mass download 2 nights ago, I did not just copy his financial spreadsheets. I grabbed his entire user profile, which included his exported web browser history. I opened the digital log. Thousands of lines of search queries and web addresses populated the screen, organized by date and time. I scrolled back to the previous month. My eyes scanned the lines of text. A sharp physical nausea hit the back of my throat. Involuntary psychiatric holds, Minnesota. Criteria for emergency civil commitment. How to prove maternal incompetence in court. 72-hour psych evaluation process. I gripped the edge of the marble island. The smooth stone offered the only stability in a room that suddenly felt like it was spinning. Greg was researching the legal framework to lock me inside a psychiatric ward. In the state of Minnesota, an interested party can petition for an emergency mental health hold if they can demonstrate the individual is a danger to themselves or others. Greg was the husband. Brenda was the resident witness. They just needed the behavioral evidence. I closed the browser log and opened a folder named Family Restructure. Inside sat a drafted legal petition. It was a formal filing for emergency sole custody of Leo. I read the paragraphs of legal jargon. It was a masterpiece of twisted reality. The document outlined my alleged erratic behavior over the past few weeks. It detailed the afternoon I walked 6 miles down a freezing highway with an infant. The petition did not mention that Brenda had confiscated my car. It did not mention I was walking to get fever medicine. It painted the event as a dangerous, delusional wandering that placed a child in imminent physical peril. The document continued. It cited my flat, unemotional response during family dinners. The exact survival mechanism I used to endure their microaggressions was logged as catatonic withdrawal. They engineered situations to trigger my distress, and when I refused to react, they documented my silence as psychological dissociation. They were building a medical trap. I scrolled to the bottom of the directory. One more file remained. It was a draft of a quitclaim deed. I read the property address at the top of the page. It was my house. The 2-story craftsman home I purchased with my own savings before Greg ever bought a wedding ring. The document was designed to relinquish my total ownership of the property, transferring the deed entirely to Greg and Brenda. The signature line was blank, waiting for my forged name. The notary block at the bottom was also blank, waiting for Cousin Derek to press his fraudulent ink seal onto the paper. The pieces of the execution clicked into place. The strategy was an annihilation protocol. They planned to wait until the real estate appraisal was finished to establish the exact market value of the home for their asset portfolio. Once the appraisal was logged, Greg would execute the forged quitclaim deed using the power of attorney he tricked me into signing at the hospital. Simultaneously, he and Brenda would call the authorities. They would present their custody petition and their manufactured evidence of my mental collapse. They would point to my lack of a vehicle, my freezing house, and my supposed paranoia. I would be placed in the back of an ambulance on an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. By the time I was released from the hospital ward, the locks on my house would be changed. The deed would be in their names. Greg would have temporary sole custody of Leo. I would be homeless, separated from my son, and burdened with a medical record of severe mental instability that would destroy my career as a compliance auditor. I would be erased. I stood up and walked into the living room. Leo was sitting on his playmat, stacking soft fabric blocks. He looked up at me and offered a toothless smile. The primal protective instinct in my chest merged with the cold, unyielding logic of my profession. If I confronted Greg now, I would play right into their hands. Screaming, crying, or demanding answers would only give them the hysterical reaction they needed to call the authorities early. I could not fight them with anger. I had to fight them with logistics. I needed to control the timeline. The recorded conversation in the nursery mentioned an appraisal for next week. I needed to know the exact schedule. During the mass data download, I had accessed Greg's calendar synchronization token. I opened the email application on the burner tablet and entered the credentials to mirror his incoming messages. I stood in the kitchen, watching the digital inbox refresh. Old messages populated first. Retail advertisements, work memos, sports newsletters. Then, a new notification dropped into the queue. The screen lit up. A sharp ping echoed in the quiet kitchen. I tapped the bold text. It was an automated email confirmation from a local real estate valuation firm. I read the message. The schedule had been moved up. The appraiser was not coming next week. The real estate appraiser was confirmed to arrive at my house tomorrow at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It was Thursday morning. The digital clock on the microwave read 8 o'clock. The house was quiet, still trapped in the artificial chill Greg had imposed. I stood at the kitchen counter packing a canvas diaper bag with measured precision. Formula, wipes, a heavy knit blanket. My burner tablet vibrated inside my coat pocket. I pulled it out and read a new text message from Greg. Take the baby to the park down the street. Stay out of the house from 11 until 1. A maintenance worker is coming to check the HVAC vents, and he needs the rooms clear. Do not get in his way. I locked the screen. The HVAC story was a thin, fragile cover. He needed the property empty so the real estate appraiser could measure the square footage, photograph the interior upgrades, and finalize the market valuation. If that man walked through my front door and filed his report, the final variable in their equation would be solved. Greg would execute the forged quitclaim deed, transfer the title of my home, and file the emergency psychiatric petition before the weekend was over. I zipped the diaper bag and strapped Leo into his insulated stroller. I bundled myself in my thick wool coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and pushed the stroller out the front door. The winter air hit my lungs like shattered glass. I did not walk toward the neighborhood park. I turned right, pushing the wheels through the salted slush, and headed toward the intersecting avenue 2 blocks away. A familiar silver truck was parked along the curb, its engine idling low. I maneuvered the stroller to the passenger side. Jim stepped out into the cold, taking the baby from my arms and securing him in a car seat installed in the back row. I climbed into the front passenger seat. Jim folded the stroller, tossed it into the truck bed, and got behind the steering wheel. We had an unobstructed view of the street leading to my driveway. Jim reached into the center console and handed me a cardboard cup with a plastic lid. "Drink this," he said. I took the cup. It was black coffee, scalding hot. My hands were shaking so hard that dark drops spilled through the opening in the lid, staining the white cardboard. I squeezed the cup, trying to force my fingers to stay still. The tremors had nothing to do with the freezing Minnesota temperature outside the windshield. They were born of pure, distilled adrenaline. My nervous system was preparing for a collision. If we failed to turn the appraiser away, my entire defense strategy would collapse. I would lose my house and my son. "You need to regulate your breathing," Pearl Jim said. His voice was low and steady, anchoring me to the present moment. "Panic is a luxury you cannot afford right now. We manage the variables. We control the gate." I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the bitter steam of the coffee. I focused on the heat seeping into my palms. I nodded once. We waited in the truck. The minutes ticked by. The neighborhood was silent save for the occasional passing snowplow. At 10 minutes before noon, a white 4-door sedan turned onto my street. It crawled past our truck, slowing down as the driver checked the house numbers on the mailboxes. The car pulled over and parked directly in front of my driveway. A man wearing a beige winter jacket and wire-rimmed glasses stepped out. He carried a leather portfolio clipboard and a laser distance measuring device. "That is him," I whispered, leaning back into the shadows of the truck cab to avoid being seen. Jim unbuckled his seatbelt. "Stay here. Keep the doors locked." My father stepped out of the truck and walked down the frozen sidewalk. He did not run. He did not march. He walked with the heavy, unhurried stride of a man who owned the pavement beneath his boots. During his decades in corporate logistics, Jim had handled union strikes, hostile warehouse audits, and aggressive freight negotiators. He knew how to project authority without ever raising his voice. I watched through the windshield. Jim intercepted the appraiser just as the man reached the bottom of my driveway steps. I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language. The appraiser stopped looking confused. He pointed toward my house with his pen. Jim shook his head, holding up a hand to pause the conversation. My father reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. Jim was speaking the language of bureaucracy. He was explaining that there was a complex clerical error regarding the title of the property. He was spinning a narrative about an ongoing legal dispute, warning the appraiser that submitting a valuation report today would entangle the man's firm in a messy, protracted liability lawsuit. The appraiser frowned, adjusting his glasses. He looked at the clipboard, then back at Jim. He was a contractor paid by the job. He did not want to be dragged into a courtroom dispute over a standard residential valuation. Jim pulled a thick fold of green paper from his wallet. He peeled off 5 $100 bills. He folded the cash and extended his hand. I knew exactly what my father was saying. He was offering a processing fee for the inconvenience. He was telling the man to mark the appointment as a resident no-show, file a scheduling failure, and push the internal deadline back by 14 days. He was purchasing a 2-week delay. The appraiser hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked up and down the empty street. He took the folded cash, slid it into his jacket pocket, and clicked his pen. He scribbled a quick note on his clipboard, turned around, and walked back to his white sedan. The car engine started. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, driving past our truck and disappearing around the corner. Jim walked back and climbed into the driver's seat. He rubbed his hands together, pushing the heat vents higher. "Crisis averted," he said, putting the truck in gear. "The firm will flag the appointment as a client cancellation. Greg will not get a valuation report today. He cannot file the deed without it." The suffocating pressure in my chest finally cracked, letting a rush of clean oxygen into my lungs. We had bought the time we needed. I drank the hot coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my core. Jim dropped me off near the park 2 hours later. I walked the stroller back to the house, arriving just as Greg pulled his car into the driveway. He stepped out looking agitated. He checked his phone repeatedly. He asked me if I had seen the maintenance worker. I kept my face blank, offering a mild shrug. I told him we had been at the park all afternoon, and nobody was at the house when we returned. Greg cursed under his breath, muttering about unreliable contractors. He walked inside, pulling up his email to demand an explanation from the firm. Later that evening, the front door opened. Brenda arrived. She carried 3 large, glossy shopping bags from a high-end boutique. She dropped them on the living room sofa and summoned Greg and me into the kitchen. She stood at the head of the marble island, radiating a smug, self-important energy. "I have made a decision regarding my 60th birthday next month," Brenda announced. She removed her leather gloves, placing them neatly on the counter. "We are not doing a quiet restaurant dinner. I am hosting a family legacy event right here in this house. I have invited 50 of my closest friends, colleagues, and members of my charity board." Greg smiled, praising her idea, eager to keep her ego inflated. Brenda turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were sharp, calculating the boundaries of her control. "Since you express such a strong desire to renew your vows and prove your loyalty to this family," Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "you will be handling the catering. All of it. I want a formal, multi-course dinner. Appetizers, a plated salad, and my favorite entree. I expect you to prepare beef Wellington for 50 guests. Beef Wellington is a notoriously difficult dish. It requires precise searing delicate pastry wrapping and hours of intensive labor to produce even a single portion. Preparing enough to serve 50 people in a residential kitchen was a monumental physical and logistical task. It would require days of uninterrupted prep work. Brenda knew this. She was assigning me a crushing burden of manual labor to test my obedience. She wanted to watch me sweat, struggle, and serve her friends like a hired maid. She crossed her arms. "I assume you can handle this, Pearl. I would hate to tell my guests that my daughter-in-law lacks the dedication to honor her family." I looked at Brenda. I looked at the marble countertops paid for by my salary. I thought about the forged documents sitting in a hidden cloud server and the real estate appraiser Jim had just paid to disappear. They thought this party was a punishment. They did not realize they had just handed me the perfect stage. I let my shoulders drop, adopting the posture of a weary but compliant wife. I offered her a soft, submissive smile. "I would be honored," I said. "The preparation for a 50-person formal dinner is not merely cooking. It is a grueling logistical campaign. Preparing 50 individual portions of beef Wellington requires an orchestrated assembly line of intense manual labor. I needed to sear center-cut beef tenderloins in smoking hot cast-iron skillets. I had to finely chop pounds of cremini mushrooms to create the duxelle paste, cooking them down until all the moisture evaporated. I needed to wrap each piece of meat in delicate prosciutto, encase it in chilled puff pastry, and brush the dough with an egg wash. The physical toll was immense. My lower back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The arches of my feet burned from standing on the hard kitchen tile for 12 hours a day. The house was still locked at 60 degrees, so I wore a heavy wool sweater over my apron, my fingers stiff from the ambient chill. Greg and Brenda observed my exhaustion with profound satisfaction. They watched me scrub baking sheets and measure ingredients, interpreting my silent labor as the ultimate submission. They believed the sheer weight of the work was breaking whatever defiance I had left. They allowed me to leave the house to purchase the vast quantities of wholesale supplies required for the menu. Greg still refused to return my car keys, so he arranged for Jim to pick me up for the grocery runs. Greg assumed my father was simply playing the role of a chauffeur for a defeated woman. He had no idea the catering assignment was the perfect smokescreen. Every time Jim parked his silver truck at the end of my driveway, I walked out carrying heavy canvas grocery bags. To anyone watching from the living room window, it looked like I was transporting empty totes to the wholesale market. But hidden beneath the canvas fabric, zipped tightly inside insulated cooler bags, were the foundational assets of my life. During the first supply run, I smuggled out a heavy, fireproof lockbox. Inside that box was my passport, Leo's birth certificate, our social security cards, and the original deed to my house. I handed the steel container across the center console to my father. Jim took it without a word, placing it on the floorboards of the truck. On the second trip, I packed Leo's winter clothing, his favorite stuffed animals, and a collection of heirloom jewelry my grandmother had left me. I buried these items beneath layers of plastic wrap and empty egg cartons. While I was inside the grocery store purchasing flats of butter and heavy cream, Jim was driving across town to a secure, climate-controlled storage facility. He rented the unit under a corporate alias. Piece by piece, errand by errand, I physically extracted my identity from the house. By the time I returned to the kitchen to unpack the actual groceries, the most vulnerable pieces of my life were safely locked behind a steel roll-up door far beyond the reach of Greg and his mother. The physical pain of the cooking provided an excellent shield. When Greg walked into the kitchen and saw the dark circles under my eyes, he assumed I was crumbling under the weight of his discipline. He did not know the exhaustion was a symptom of my covert extraction. I used the ache in my muscles to mask the sharp, calculating energy vibrating in my chest. On Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the scheduled event, the psychological warfare peaked. I stood at the marble island, a dusting of white flour covering the dark stone. I was working with the final batch of chilled puff pastry, using a wooden rolling pin to flatten the dough into precise rectangles. The front door opened. Brenda walked into the foyer, accompanied by 3 women from her charity board. The air shifted immediately, thick with the scent of expensive floral perfumes and the sharp clicking of leather heels on the hardwood floor. These were women draped in cashmere sweaters and diamond tennis bracelets. They were the elite of Brenda's social circle, invited over early for a glass of afternoon wine. Brenda led them directly into the kitchen. She wanted an audience. She poured 4 glasses of crisp white wine from the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, perfectly positioning herself so her friends could watch me work. I kept my head down. I continued rolling the dough, my hands moving in a steady, rhythmic motion. "It smells like a commercial bakery in here," one of the women said, her tone hovering somewhere between polite observation and thinly veiled pity. She took a sip from her crystal glass. "You are certainly keeping her busy, Brenda." Brenda smiled over the rim of her wine glass. "Pearl is learning the value of hard work. We believe it is important to earn your place in this family. Sometimes a little domestic focus is exactly what a young mother needs to realign her priorities." The women offered soft, patronizing laughs. They looked at my flour-dusted sweater and my bare face. They saw a domestic servant, a woman brought to heel by a wealthy, powerful mother-in-law. I picked up a sharp paring knife. I needed to score the top of the pastry dough to allow steam to escape during the baking process. I held the handle of the knife, letting the cold steel rest against my fingertips. "Make sure the edges are crimped evenly," Pearl Brenda instructed, her voice projecting across the kitchen so her friends would hear the command. "We eat with our eyes first. I will not have my guests served anything less than perfection." I did not flinch. I did not look up. I absorbed the humiliation with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. I dragged the tip of the blade across the pale dough. I cut diagonal lines, pressing just deep enough to mark the surface without severing the base. I scored the pastry in a precise geometric crosshatch pattern. Every cut of the knife was a mathematical calculation. I listened to their mocking laughter and the clinking of their jewelry. I cataloged their condescension. They thought they were witnessing my subjugation. They did not understand they were standing inside a collapsing structure. I am an auditor. I spend my life analyzing ledgers, projecting deficits, and identifying the exact moment an enterprise is going to face bankruptcy. I knew the timeline of their destruction. I knew the exact sequence of wire transfers and legal filings required to decimate their financial standing. I finished scoring the pastry and set the knife down. I looked up, meeting Brenda's gaze with a blank, unreadable expression. "The crimping is even," I said. My voice was calm, holding zero trace of resentment. "The presentation will be exactly what you deserve." Brenda offered a satisfied nod, turning back to her friends to guide them into the living room. They walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the scent of raw dough and roasted garlic. I went back to work. I assembled the final trays, moving the heavy baking sheets into the industrial refrigerator to chill overnight. I cleaned the marble island, scrubbing the stone until it gleamed under the pendant lights. Late that night, the house finally went quiet. Greg was asleep upstairs. Brenda had returned to her own home. I stood alone in the dark walk-in pantry, surrounded by tall shelves of dry goods and canned vegetables. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cinnamon. I reached deep into the pocket of my fleece robe and pulled out the prepaid burner smartphone. It was vibrating, a silent, steady pulse against my palm. I answered the call, lifting the device to my ear. I did not speak first. "Pearl," a woman whispered on the other end of the line. It was my attorney. The legal counsel Jim and I had retained days ago using my hidden cellular tablet. "I am here," I whispered back. "The legal traps are set," the attorney said, her voice crisp and professional. "I have the injunction paperwork drafted for the title of the house. We have the evidence bundle ready for the notary fraud. The quitclaim deed reversal is prepped for the court docket." I closed my eyes, leaning the back of my head against the wooden pantry shelf. The physical exhaustion weighing down my bones seemed to evaporate, replaced by a surge of electric anticipation. "What is the next step?" I asked. The attorney took a breath. "We have the legal framework locked. We just need to trigger the financial freeze. Once you sever the accounts, the clock starts. Are you ready for tomorrow?" I looked at the glowing screen of the phone in the dark pantry. I thought about the plastic grocery bags on my feet in the snow. I thought about the forged hospital signature. I thought about the stolen $40,000. "I am ready," I said. "I will pull the plug in the morning." I woke up at 4 a.m. on Friday. The house was entirely silent and still locked in the biting chill Greg preferred. The heavy scent of roasted mushrooms and seared beef tenderloin lingered in the air from my grueling catering work the previous day. I threw off the heavy duvet, leaving Greg asleep in the dark bedroom. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, wrapped my fleece robe tightly around my waist, and retrieved the hidden cellular tablet from the waterproof case in the laundry room. I sat at the marble island and opened a secure, encrypted communication channel. A green indicator light blinked on the screen, signaling an active connection. I was not alone in the digital space. On the other end of the connection sat Marcus. He was a senior forensic accountant operating out of an independent firm in Chicago. I knew Marcus from a complex federal hospital audit 3 years ago. He spent his career dismantling hidden assets, tracing offshore accounts, and unraveling corporate embezzlement schemes. I had hired him using the burner device 2 days prior. Marcus spoke through the audio feed. His voice was a low, steady rumble in the quiet kitchen. He told me the stolen ledgers and the copied files from Greg's laptop were fully uploaded into his secure server. We brought the Golden Horizons directory up on our respective screens. Poetic justice is rarely found in dramatic speeches or sudden bursts of anger. Real, lasting justice is found in the meticulous architecture of a ledger. I did not just want to stop Greg and Brenda from stealing my future paychecks. I wanted to decimate the infrastructure they built to harvest my labor. Marcus explained the structural reality of their crime. Brenda had registered Golden Horizons as a limited liability company. People utilized this specific corporate structure to build a legal fortress around their personal wealth. If a standard LLC defaults on a loan or faces a catastrophic lawsuit, the business entity absorbs the damage. The creditors can seize the business assets, but they cannot touch the personal savings or the private residence of the owner. Greg and Brenda thought they were brilliant. They believed that by routing my stolen wages into a registered corporate entity, they had insulated themselves from consequence. They assumed that if I ever discovered the theft and attempted to sue them, the LLC would act as a sacrificial shield. They could simply declare Golden Horizons bankrupt, walk away with the money they had already spent, and leave me fighting a ghost company with zero assets. But arrogant people always make careless mistakes. Thieves who view their family members as financial resources rarely respect the boundaries of legal corporate governance. I told Marcus to pull the granular expense reports for the last 11 months. I wanted to see every single outbound transaction authorized by Brenda. The spreadsheet populated on my tablet. Line after line of black text detailed the outflow of my stolen salary. The largest disbursement sat near the top of the document. It was the $40,000 personal loan secured by the forged title of my Honda SUV. The funds were wired directly from Golden Horizons to a luxury home contracting firm to finance Brenda's basement remodel. I scrolled past the construction invoices, digging deeper into the daily operational expenses of the corporate account. I was looking for a specific structural fracture. I found it on page 4 of the ledger. It was a retail transaction processed at a high-end department store in the commercial district. The charge was for $400. I clicked the corresponding digital receipt attached to the line item. The invoice detailed the purchase of a single premium skincare product. It was a jar of La Mer face cream. I stared at the glowing screen. The transaction date matched a week where I had worked 60 hours auditing a chaotic hospital payroll system. I felt the rough calluses on my own heels. I remembered the sensation of freezing slush soaking through the plastic grocery bags wrapped around my socks. While I was trudging down an icy highway carrying my infant son, my mother-in-law was using a corporate account funded entirely by my hijacked wages to purchase a luxury facial moisturizer. She did not just steal my money. She treated my labor as her personal vanity fund. Marcus let out a short, sharp breath over the audio channel. He saw the transaction on his monitor. He said this was the fatal error. He explained the legal doctrine required to dismantle her fortress.
It is a corporate law concept known as piercing the corporate veil. When the owner of a limited liability company treats the business account like a personal piggy bank, commingling luxury purchases with corporate funds, they violate the foundational charter of the entity. By buying face cream and basement drywall with LLC money, Brenda destroyed the legal barrier between her private wealth and her business liabilities.
The shield was gone. When the police and the banking fraud investigators examined this ledger, a judge would immediately invalidate the corporate protection. Golden Horizons would be recognized as a fraudulent extension of Brenda's personal wallet. The implications were catastrophic for her. The $40,000 loan she secured using the forged title of my car would no longer belong to a shielded company. When I filed the fraud report and the credit union demanded immediate repayment, they would not pursue a bankrupt LLC. They would pursue Brenda. The bank would hold her personally liable for the entire balance. They would seize her private checking accounts. They would place aggressive legal liens on her primary residence. She would face an inescapable, crushing financial ruin. A profound sense of satisfaction settled into my chest. It was cold, clean, and mathematically perfect. We moved to the final phase of the operation. I could not afford to wait for the police and the courts to recover my stolen salary. Asset forfeiture and restitution orders take months, sometimes years, to navigate through the legal system. I needed my capital returned immediately to secure a new home for Leo and myself. Marcus helped me construct the digital pipeline for a reverse extraction. Greg had programmed automated sweep protocols to drain my biweekly paychecks from our joint account into Golden Horizons. I used my tablet to write a counter script. I mapped a sequence of prioritized wire transfers designed to execute simultaneously. The script would access the LLC ledger, calculate the exact sum of my stolen wages, and pull every single dollar back through the banking network. The recovered funds would be routed instantly into a secure, single-signatory escrow account Marcus had established under a blind privacy trust. I double-checked the routing numbers and verified the encryption keys. The extraction code was flawless. I could not trigger the program yet. If I drained the LLC today, Greg might check his mobile banking application while sitting at his office desk. He would see the zero balance, realize the trap was sprung, and escalate the physical confrontation before the authorities were in place. The element of surprise was the most critical variable in the entire campaign. I set a digital delay on the script. The reverse wire transfers were locked to execute the following morning, mere hours before the guests were scheduled to arrive for Brenda's legacy dinner. I finalized the programming and logged out of the secure server. I closed the tablet and returned it to the waterproof case, hiding it back in the laundry room cabinet. I stood in the center of the kitchen. The marble countertops were pristine. The trays of unbaked beef Wellington rested inside the industrial refrigerator, waiting for the oven. The physical stage was set, the legal traps were armed, the financial extraction was cued. My burner phone vibrated inside the pocket of my fleece robe. I pulled the device out and looked at the screen. It was a multimedia message from Jim. The image loaded. It was a photograph taken in the early morning light. It showed a massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck idling in a commercial parking lot. The yellow beacon lights on the roof of the cab were flashing. Below the photograph was a single line of text from my father. Asset recovery locked for Saturday at 8:00 p.m. Saturday morning arrived. The sky outside the kitchen window was the color of slate, threatening another heavy snowfall. It was the day of Brenda's 60th birthday legacy dinner. The house was immaculate. The hardwood floors were polished. The silver dining utensils were polished and laid out in perfect geometric alignment across the long wooden table. I had been awake since 3 in the morning, preparing the final stages of the massive meal. The physical exhaustion was a dull roar in the background of my mind, easily overpowered by the sharp, crystalline focus of the impending detonation. Greg came downstairs at 9:00. He wore sweatpants and a thick hooded sweatshirt. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a mug of black coffee, and leaned against the marble island. He surveyed the trays of appetizers resting on the counters and the stacked plates waiting to be filled. He watched me wiping down the stainless steel stove. "Everything needs to be perfect tonight," Pearl Greg said, taking a sip from his mug. His tone was casual, laced with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he held absolute control over his environment. "Mom has important colleagues coming. I do not want any erratic behavior. You serve the food, you clear the plates, and you smile. Prove to everyone that you can handle the pressure of this family." I kept my hands moving across the metal surface. I did not pause my work. I did not look at him. I simply offered a mild, compliant nod. "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice soft and deferential. "The beef Wellingtons are prepped. I will make sure the evening goes exactly as planned." Greg offered a satisfied grunt. He set his empty mug in the sink and checked his watch. "I have a haircut appointment across town," he announced. "Mom is at the salon getting a manicure. I will be back by noon to help set up the bar. Do not ruin the pastry." He grabbed his keys from the counter and walked out the front door. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place. The engine of his sedan started in the driveway, and the tires crunched against the frozen pavement as he backed out into the street. The house was empty. The perimeter was clear. I dried my hands on a dish towel and dropped it onto the counter. I walked into the laundry room, bypassing the washing machine, and knelt in front of the bottom cabinet. I retrieved the waterproof plastic case, unlatched the heavy clasps, and pulled out the cellular tablet. I carried the device back to the kitchen island and set it down next to the trays of prepared food. The time for quiet observation was over. The extraction protocol was active. I tapped the screen, opening the encrypted communication channel linked to Marcus, the forensic accountant in Chicago. The green indicator light glowed steadily. I opened the banking application containing the reverse wire transfer scripts we had built the day before. This was the point of no return. The moment I executed the commands, my actions would become visible on the banking grid. If Greg checked his phone application while sitting in the barber's chair, he would see the balance drop. He would instantly realize the trap had been sprung. He would race back to the house, and the entire operation would spiral into a chaotic, potentially dangerous physical confrontation before the authorities were positioned. The risk was suffocating. Every passing second amplified the tension in the quiet kitchen. I placed my index finger on the execute command icon. I did not hesitate. I tapped the screen. The digital machinery engaged. First, I severed the joint accounts. I accessed the primary holding ledger where my biweekly paychecks had been deposited for the past year. I revoked Greg's administrative access, removed his name from the authorized user registry, and initiated a hard lock on the routing numbers. No more automated sweeps, no more ghost transfers. The pipeline was permanently severed. Second, I initiated the financial recovery. The script we wrote bypassed the standard processing delays. It hit the Golden Horizons LLC ledger like a digital wrecking ball. The program calculated the exact sum of my stolen $85,000 salary. It ignored the La Mer face cream purchases and the basement remodeling invoices. It gripped the remaining capital and pulled it violently backward through the banking network. The numbers on my screen scrolled rapidly as the funds vanished from Brenda's corporate entity and reappeared securely inside my blind trust escrow account. Third, I engaged the legal demolition. I opened a direct portal to the fraud department of the regional credit union that held the $40,000 personal loan. I uploaded the high-resolution scan of the forged power of attorney. I uploaded the evidence bundle proving Cousin Derek's notary stamp was fraudulent. I flagged the entire loan origination packet as a severe felony identity theft event. The banking system responded with automated, ruthless efficiency. The moment the credit union fraud algorithms processed the forged documents, they initiated a total asset freeze on Golden Horizons. The corporate account was locked. The remaining funds were frozen pending federal investigation. Brenda could not withdraw a single cent. She could not pay a utility bill. Her financial fortress was reduced to a crime scene. I watched the final confirmation dialog box appear on the tablet screen. The operation was complete. I had recovered my stolen wages, dismantled their corporate shield, and triggered a major banking investigation. But I was not quite finished. I needed to leave a message. I opened the transfer menu one last time. I selected my secure escrow account as the origin point. I selected Greg's personal private checking account as the destination. I bypassed the standard transaction notes and typed a custom alphanumeric string into the memo line. I initiated a single manual wire transfer. I sent Greg exactly $1. It was a mathematical insult, a deliberate, undeniable signal that the system had not malfunctioned. The bank had not made a clerical error. The missing money was not a glitch. The $1 deposit was my signature. It told him that I saw the ledger, I understood the theft, and I had assigned him an exact, finalized valuation. I closed the banking application. I logged out of the secure server. I powered down the cellular tablet and packed it away into the waterproof case, hiding it deep within the laundry room cabinet. I walked back into the kitchen and surveyed the room. The space looked identical to how Greg had left it an hour ago. The trays of appetizers were undisturbed. The plates were stacked neatly. The beef Wellingtons rested perfectly inside the industrial refrigerator. There was no physical evidence of the devastation that had just occurred. I walked into the hallway closet and pulled out my heavy wool winter coat. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and buttoned it up to my neck. I grabbed a thick scarf and wrapped it around my throat. I walked into the living room, picked up Leo from his playpen, and began dressing him in his insulated snowsuit. I needed to extract myself from the house before Greg returned. I needed to reach Jim and transport the physical evidence binder to the police precinct. I zipped Leo into his suit and picked up the canvas diaper bag. I walked back toward the front door. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked loudly. The handle turned. The door swung open, bringing a blast of freezing winter air into the foyer. Greg stepped inside. He was 30 minutes early. His haircut was finished, the edges neat and precise. He shook the snow from his jacket and stomped his boots on the entry mat. He stopped in his tracks, his eyes darting from my wool coat to the baby bundled in my arms. His casual, arrogant posture vanished. His eyes narrowed instantly, suspicious. The atmosphere in the hallway turned brittle and dangerous. "Where are you going?" Greg asked. His voice was hard, carrying a sharp edge of accusation. He took a step forward, blocking the path to the open doorway. "Mom will be here in a few hours. Guests are arriving at 5. You are supposed to be prepping the pastry. Why are you wearing your coat?" My heart slammed against my ribs. The digital trap was already sprung. If he pulled out his phone right now to check the time, he might see a notification from his banking application regarding the $1 deposit. If he saw the notification, the confrontation would happen right here in the isolated hallway while I was holding my infant son. I forced my nervous system to obey my will. I kept my face entirely blank, projecting the exhausted, subservient persona he expected to see. I adjusted Leo on my hip, letting out a small, tired sigh. "Leo just sneezed 3 times in a row," I said, keeping my voice low and weary. "I think the fever from last week is trying to come back. I am just running to the pharmacy down the street to get a new bottle of baby Tylenol. I will be back in 20 minutes. The pastry is chilling. Everything is under control." Greg stared at me, his jaw tight. He scrutinized my face, searching for a crack in the performance. Greg stared at me, his jaw tight. He scrutinized my face, searching for a crack in the performance. I kept my breathing slow and even. I adjusted the diaper bag on my shoulder, looking down at the floor as if I were too exhausted to meet his gaze. Leo let out a small, timely sniffle against my chest. Greg exhaled a sharp breath of annoyance. He stepped aside, clearing the path to the doorway. "Make it quick," he snapped. "Mom wants the dining room table set before 2 o'clock. And do not forget to pick up extra ice on the way back." I nodded submissively. "I will hurry," I whispered. I walked past him, feeling the heat of his anger radiating in the small hallway. I stepped out onto the concrete porch. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me. I did not run. Running would betray panic. I walked at a steady, measured pace down the icy driveway, pushing the stroller through the fresh layer of snow. I turned the corner, breaking the line of sight from the living room windows. A silver Ford truck sat idling near the edge of the neighborhood park. Jim was behind the wheel. I reached the passenger side, unbuckled Leo from the stroller, and handed him across the center console to my father. Jim secured the baby in the back seat. I climbed in, slamming the heavy door shut. "Go," I said. Jim put the truck in gear and accelerated away from the curb. He did not ask questions. The heater blasted warm air over my frozen face. I reached into my canvas diaper bag and bypassed the formula and the heavy blankets. From the bottom of the tote, I pulled out a thick, heavy-duty plastic binder. It was 3 inches wide, secured with a black elastic strap. This was the culmination of the entire shadow campaign. We drove through the commercial district, bypassing the retail centers and the highway exits. Jim steered the truck toward the municipal complex located in the center of the county. The massive concrete structure housed the local courthouse, the county clerk offices, and the primary police precinct. We parked in the visitor lot. The wind whipped across the open asphalt as we walked toward the heavy glass doors of the precinct. Jim carried Leo. I carried the binder. The interior of the police station smelled of strong floor cleaner and stale coffee. We bypassed the front patrol desk and walked toward the administrative elevators. Jim used his logistics credentials and a few well-placed phone calls the previous afternoon to secure a direct meeting with the Financial Crimes Division. We stepped out onto the third floor. The hallway was quiet, lined with frosted glass office doors. We entered a small, windowless interview room. A man sat behind a metal desk. He wore a rumpled dress shirt and a loosened tie. A brass nameplate on his desk read, Detective Miller. He looked exhausted, rubbing his temples as we walked in. He gestured for us to sit down. I took the chair opposite the desk. Jim stood near the door, holding Leo. Detective Miller leaned forward, folding his hands over a yellow legal pad. Jim tells me you have an active fraud complaint regarding a stolen vehicle title and unauthorized bank transfers. We get these domestic dispute cases every week, Mrs. Kelly. Usually it is just a messy divorce where spouses are hiding assets from each other. I need to manage your expectations. Unless you have hard, prosecutable proof of forgery, this is a civil matter for family court. We do not have the manpower to audit your shared checking accounts. I did not argue with him. I did not offer a tearful narrative about my cruel mother-in-law or the freezing house. I placed the heavy plastic binder on the metal desk and snapped the elastic strap open. I am a healthcare compliance auditor, Detective, I said. My voice was crisp, entirely devoid of emotion. I do not bring messy domestic disputes to a financial crimes unit. I bring actionable felony indictments. I flipped the heavy cover open. The interior of the binder was a masterpiece of forensic organization. It was divided into 5 distinct sections, separated by brightly colored plastic tabs. Every document was highlighted, annotated, and cross-referenced with banking codes and timestamps. I turned to the first tab, marked in bright red. This is the Minnesota Statutory Short-Form Power of Attorney. I said, sliding the document across the desk. It grants my husband total, unilateral control over my real estate and banking assets, claiming I am medically incapacitated. Notice the execution date. Detective Miller adjusted his glasses. He looked at the date, then he looked at the secondary document I slid next to it. That is the medical discharge record from the hospital maternity ward, I explained. It proves I was recovering from an emergency surgical procedure, heavily medicated on narcotics, on the exact day this document was supposedly executed. The detective stopped rubbing his temples. He picked up a pen. I flipped to the second tab, marked in yellow. These are the banking ledgers from my primary checking account, I continued. They demonstrate an automated sweep protocol that drained $85,000 of my salary into an LLC called Golden Horizons over the past year. I slid a corporate registry document next to the ledgers. Golden Horizons is registered to my mother-in-law, Brenda Kelly. She used the stolen funds mixed with the LLC capital to purchase luxury personal items and fund residential construction. The corporate veil is pierced. It is an embezzlement pipeline. Detective Miller leaned closer to the binder. The skeptical exhaustion in his eyes vanished. The professional apathy of a precinct cop was replaced by the sharp, focused attention of an investigator looking at a perfectly constructed case file. I flipped to the third tab, marked in green. This is the loan origination packet from the regional credit union, I said. Brenda used the fraudulent power of attorney to forge the title transfer of my vehicle. She pledged my car as physical collateral to secure a $40,000 personal loan. The detective traced the highlighted routing numbers with the tip of his pen. He flipped back to the red tab, inspecting the power of attorney document again. His eyes locked onto the bottom corner of the page. He stared at the blurred circular notary stamp pressing into the paper beside my sloppy hospital signature. A bank will not process a collateral loan with a forged signature alone, the detective muttered, almost talking to himself. They need the notary seal to verify the identity. I turned to the fourth tab, marked in blue. I slid a high-resolution, digitally enhanced photograph of the original notary logbook across the metal desk. Jim had acquired the image through his contact at the county clerk office. The notary who stamped that fraudulent document is Derek Vance, I stated. He is my husband's cousin. He operates a licensed real estate brokerage in this county. He used his state commission to facilitate a $40,000 bank fraud. Detective Miller stopped moving. He set his pen down on the legal pad. The air in the small interview room seemed to change density. I am not finished, I said. I turned to the final tab marked in black. I placed the burner smartphone on the desk. I tapped the screen, opening the secure cloud server. I hit play on the audio file, recorded by the cellular baby monitor. The crisp, high-definition audio of Greg and Brenda plotting in the nursery filled the room. The detective listened as they discussed the real estate appraisal. He listened as Greg detailed his plan to document my forced walks in the snow to build a psychological profile of maternal incompetence. He listened to them explicitly plan to execute a forged quitclaim deed to steal my house and file an emergency petition to institutionalize me and take custody of my son. The recording ended. Silence stretched across the metal desk. I looked directly at Detective Miller. I executed a reverse wire extraction this morning. I drained the Golden Horizons LLC and flagged the credit union loan for identity theft. Brenda is financially locked. Greg will discover the zero balance within the hour. When he realizes the money is gone and the trap is sprung, he will not call a lawyer. He will escalate to immediate physical violence. They built a narrative that I am a danger to my child. They will use that narrative to justify taking Leo by force before I can defend myself. The timeline is critical. Detective Miller stared at the audio logs on the phone, then at the meticulously organized binder. He looked up at me. "We have been investigating Derek Vance for 6 months," the detective said. His voice was quiet, vibrating with restrained intensity. "We suspected he was running a fraudulent notary mill for illicit real estate transfers, but he insulated his operation perfectly. We could never find the paper trail connecting him directly to the compromised loans." The detective closed the heavy plastic cover of the binder. "You did not just bring me a domestic dispute, Mrs. Kelly," he said, standing up from the desk. "You just handed me the linchpin to a regional fraud network." He picked up his desk phone and dialed a 4-digit internal extension. He did not wait for a greeting on the other end of the line. "Get the tactical unit briefed and warm up the cruisers," Detective Miller commanded into the receiver. "We are executing multiple warrants. We are moving in tonight." The meeting with Detective Miller concluded swiftly. We left the heavy plastic binder on his desk. It was no longer my responsibility. It was evidence in an active federal felony investigation. Jim and I walked back through the precinct, rode the elevator down to the lobby, and stepped out into the freezing Minnesota evening. The sky was pitch black. The snow had started to fall again, dusting the windshield of the silver truck. We got inside. Jim turned the engine over and cranked the heat. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 7:15. We drove back toward my neighborhood in total silence. The tension inside the truck cab was a physical entity, heavy and dense. The legal machinery was engaged. The financial traps were sprung. The only remaining task was the physical execution of the confrontation. I had to walk back into that house. I had to face 50 of Brenda's high society friends, maintain the element of surprise, and hold the room until the authorities arrived. Jim parked the truck 3 blocks away from my house, sliding into the same shadowed curb space he used during the apology dinner weeks ago. He turned off the headlights. He kept the engine running to provide heat for Leo, who was asleep in the car seat. I sat in the passenger seat, staring into the dark street. I reached up and unbuttoned my heavy wool winter coat. I did not wear the frumpy fleece sweater beneath it. I had discarded the stained apron and the heavy wool garments in the precinct bathroom. Underneath the coat, I wore a tailored charcoal gray blazer. It was sharply cut, with structured shoulders and a crisp white blouse underneath. It was the exact uniform I wore when presenting forensic audit findings to hostile hospital board members. It projected authority, precision, and absolute control. I took off the winter coat and folded it onto the floorboards. I smoothed the lapels of the blazer. I took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs. "Wait for the signal," I told Jim. He nodded once, his hands resting on the steering wheel. I will be right behind you. I opened the passenger door and stepped out into the snow. I did not wrap my feet in plastic grocery bags this time. I wore polished leather boots. I walked down the center of the plowed street. The cold wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. Every step I took toward the 2-story Craftsman house felt lighter than the last. The crushing weight of the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, and the physical exhaustion was gone. I was not a captive returning to her cell. I was the architect of their destruction, arriving to inspect the demolition. I reached the front walkway. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles, Mercedes sedans, Lexus SUVs, and pristine Range Rovers lined the curb. Golden light spilled from the living room windows, casting long shadows across the snow. I could hear the faint muffled sound of classical piano music and the overlapping hum of dozens of conversations. I walked up the concrete steps and placed my hand on the brass handle. I turned the knob and pushed the heavy wooden door open. The foyer was crowded with expensive winter coats hanging on a temporary rack. The air was warm, thick with the scent of roasted beef tenderloin, expensive perfume, and aged red wine. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The deadbolt clicked into place. I walked into the main living room. 50 guests occupied the space. Women in elegant cocktail dresses and men in tailored suits stood in small clusters, sipping from crystal glasses and holding delicate appetizer plates. The noise level was high, a continuous stream of polite, wealthy chatter. Greg was standing near the fireplace holding a scotch glass. He wore a dark navy suit. He was laughing at a joke told by one of Brenda's charity board members. He turned his head and saw me standing in the archway. The smile vanished from his face instantly. The casual, charismatic host persona evaporated, replaced by a flash of genuine, ugly rage. I was late. I was supposed to be in the kitchen, invisible, managing the ovens and circulating the serving trays. My presence in the main room, standing idle while guests served themselves, was a direct violation of his orders. He set his scotch glass down on the mantel. He excused himself from the conversation and marched across the hardwood floor toward me. His strides were fast and aggressive. He closed the distance between us, his face flushing red. "Where the hell have you been?" Greg hissed, his voice low enough to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding guests, but sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. "Mom has been covering the appetizer rotation for an hour. Get into the kitchen right now and check the pastry." He reached out and grabbed my upper arm. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into the fabric of my tailored blazer. He intended to physically pull me out of the living room, using intimidation to force compliance. He expected me to shrink. He expected me to lower my head, apologize quickly, and scurry away to the ovens. I did not shrink. I planted my feet on the hardwood floor. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. I did not struggle. I did not try to pull away. I simply stared at his fingers with clinical disgust. Then I slowly raised my gaze to meet his eyes. I engaged the tone of voice I reserved for hostile corporate executives who tried to lie during a compliance audit. It was not a scream. It was not a plea. It was a cold, flat, weaponized command. "Remove your hand. Now." The words dropped the temperature in our immediate radius by 10 degrees. The sheer, unexpected authority in my voice shocked his nervous system. For the past year, he had conditioned me to respond with fear. The sudden, absolute absence of fear short-circuited his brain. His fingers went slack. He released my arm, taking a half step backward, his expression fracturing into profound confusion. Before Greg could formulate a response, a sharp ringing sound cut through the classical piano music. Brenda was standing at the head of the long dining room table. She held a crystal wine glass in her left hand and a silver serving spoon in her right. She tapped the spoon against the delicate glass 3 times. The ringing commanded the attention of the room. The 50 guests paused their conversations, turning toward the matriarch of the evening. Brenda smiled, radiating the triumphant glow of a woman who believed she had orchestrated a masterpiece. She wore a stunning emerald green evening gown, her hair perfectly styled, diamonds glittering at her throat. She surveyed her audience, soaking in their undivided attention. Then her eyes found me, standing in the archway near Greg. Her smile widened into something sharp and predatory. She believed she possessed the ultimate victory. She thought the physical exhaustion of the catering had broken me. She thought my suggestion of a vow renewal was an act of total surrender. She was preparing to use this audience to deliver the final psychological blow, cementing her dominance publicly under the guise of family unity. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate this milestone with me. Brenda projected her voice across the room, ensuring every guest could hear. The crowd murmured in polite agreement. But tonight is not just about celebrating my legacy. It is about acknowledging the future of our family. She gestured toward the archway where Greg and I stood. Marriage is a complicated journey. Brenda continued, her tone adopting a false, patronizing warmth. It requires dedication, sacrifice, and an understanding of your proper place within the structure of a household. For the past year, my son Greg has worked tirelessly to guide his wife through a difficult period of emotional instability. A quiet murmur rippled through the guests. A few women offered sympathetic nods toward Greg. He puffed his chest out slightly, playing the role of the long-suffering, noble husband. It has been a challenging road, Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. But I am proud to announce that the difficult days are behind us. After much reflection and a renewed commitment to her domestic responsibilities, my daughter-in-law has asked to publicly renew her vows tonight. She wants to demonstrate her loyalty to Greg, to me, and to the values we hold dear. Brenda raised her crystal wine glass high in the air. I want to thank my daughter-in-law. Brenda declared, her predatory smile locking onto me, who has finally learned respect. The guests raised their glasses in unison. A scattered, polite applause broke out across the living room. Greg turned to me, a smug, victorious sneer pulling at the corner of his mouth. He expected me to step forward, bow my head, and deliver a tearful, humiliating speech of gratitude. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored blazer. I stepped forward, moving away from Greg, and walking directly into the center of the living room. The crowd parted slightly, giving me the floor. The applause died down. 50 pairs of eyes watched me. I did not bow my head. I stood perfectly straight. I looked directly at Brenda, standing at the head of the dining table. Let us talk about respect, Brenda. The living room was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the gas fireplace and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. 50 guests stood motionless, their wine glasses suspended midair. They expected a tearful declaration of submission. They expected a broken woman groveling for acceptance. The sharp, commanding tone of my voice shattered the carefully curated atmosphere. Brenda's predatory smile faltered. The glass in her hand wavered slightly. She recovered quickly, attempting to maintain the facade. "Pearl, dear Brenda," said her voice, adopting a soothing, maternal pitch meant to pacify a hysterical child. "This is a celebration. Let us save the heavy conversations for later. You must be exhausted from the cooking. Why do you not go upstairs and rest?" I did not move. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a folded stack of heavy bond paper. It was not a speech. It was a consolidated summary of the forensic audit, complete with highlighted routing numbers, forged signatures, and LLC disbursement ledgers. "I want to thank you, Brenda," I said. My voice was clear, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I want to thank you for teaching me how this family truly operates. I want to thank you for showing me that loyalty is just a transactional currency you use to fund your vanity." A murmur of genuine alarm rippled through the crowd. A woman standing near the sofa leaned over and whispered to her husband. The polite society rules of engagement were breaking down. They realized they were no longer witnessing a vow renewal. They were witnessing an execution. I unfolded the stack of papers. I did not yell. Screaming is a symptom of losing control. I projected my voice with the cold, mathematical precision of an auditor delivering a final damage report to a bankrupt board of directors. "Let us review the accounting of this family legacy," I announced. I turned my gaze toward Greg. He was frozen near the archway, his face draining of color. Let us talk about the general power of attorney you slipped into a stack of hospital billing forms while I was recovering from an emergency cesarean section, I said. The document you used to declare me medically incapacitated, stripping me of my civil rights so you could hijack my financial existence. Gasps echoed through the room. Several guests took physical steps backward, putting distance between themselves and Greg. I turned back to Brenda. Let us talk about the $40,000 personal loan you secured using the forged title of my Honda SUV. I continued, the vehicle you confiscated from me because I bought the wrong brand of baby formula. The vehicle you leveraged to finance the custom drywall and lighting fixtures in your basement. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her emerald gown suddenly looked absurd against the stark reality of the accusations. Let us talk about Golden Horizons, LLC. I said, reading the bold text from the top page of my stack. The corporate entity registered in your name, Brenda. The entity designed to harvest $85,000 of my stolen salary over the past 12 months. The entity you used as a personal slush fund to purchase $400 jars of La Mer face cream while I was walking 6 miles down a freezing highway to buy medicine for your grandson. I stepped toward the massive marble dining table. In the center sat an elaborate charcuterie board, surrounded by expensive crackers and artisanal jams. A large, uncut wheel of brie cheese occupied the middle of the platter. I placed the stack of printed, highlighted bank statements directly on top of the brie cheese. The paper absorbed the moisture from the rind. The black ink of the routing numbers contrasted violently against the white cheese. It was a physical manifestation of their ruined aesthetic. The room went entirely, violently silent. The classical piano music had stopped playing. The hum of the refrigerator seemed deafening. No one moved. The 50 guests stared at the stack of papers resting on the charcuterie board, processing the magnitude of the felonies I had just outlined. Brenda finally found her voice. It was a thin, reedy sound, stripped of all its former power. She attempted to laugh a dry, nervous chuckle that echoed awkwardly in the silent room. "This is absurd," Brenda stammered, looking around at her charity board members. Her friends did not look back. They avoided her eyes. "She is unwell. You all know she has been struggling since the baby was born. This is a paranoid delusion. She is having a mental breakdown." Greg snapped out of his paralysis. His fear transmuted instantly into explosive, desperate rage. The carefully constructed persona he wore for society vanished, revealing the violent, controlling core beneath. His face turned a deep, mottled purple. "Shut your mouth," Greg screamed, his voice cracking with fury. He marched toward me, his hands balled into fists. "You are insane. You are delusional. We are calling an ambulance right now. You need to be committed to a psychiatric ward. You are a danger to yourself and our son." He was executing the final phase of their plan. He was using the confrontation as the catalyst to trigger the involuntary psychiatric hold. He reached into his suit pocket, pulling out his cell phone to dial the authorities. I did not flinch. I did not take a step backward. I stood beside the dining table, watching him frantically punch numbers into his screen. "You cannot file the emergency custody petition, Greg," I said calmly, "and you cannot execute the forged quitclaim deed for my house." Greg stopped dialing. He looked up, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I intercepted the real estate appraiser on Thursday," I explained. "He took a $500 processing fee to mark you as a no-show. You do not have the property valuation. Your legal paperwork is useless." Greg's eyes widened. The realization that I had been actively dismantling his operation from the shadows hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at his phone, his thumb trembling. "And you cannot use the money in Golden Horizons to hire a defense attorney," I added. Brenda grabbed the edge of the dining table, her knuckles turning white. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I pierced the corporate veil," Brenda, I stated. "By using the LLC funds for personal luxury purchases, you destroyed your legal protection." I executed a reverse wire extraction this morning. I drained $85,000 back into a secure escrow account. The credit union has flagged your $40,000 loan for identity theft. The LLC is frozen. You are personally liable for the entire balance. You are bankrupt. Greg furiously tapped the banking application on his phone. The screen loaded. I watched his eyes scan the balance. I knew exactly what he saw. He saw the empty joint account. He saw the locked administrative access. And he saw the single manual wire transfer I had sent him that morning. $1. A choked, guttural sound escaped Greg's throat. It was the sound of a man watching his entire empire disintegrate in real time. He dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. He lunged toward me, raising his hands, intending to physically subdue me. I did not move. I simply raised my left wrist and looked at the face of my watch. The second hand swept past the 12. It was exactly 7:59 p.m. The heavy, suffocating silence inside the living room was shattered by a sudden, intense burst of illumination. Brilliant flashes of red and blue light exploded through the large front windows. The strobe effect washed across the walls, illuminating the terrified faces of the 50 guests. The rhythmic sweeping of emergency beacons cut through the dark winter night, turning the snow outside into a shifting kaleidoscope of color. Greg froze mid-lunge. Brenda let out a sharp, panicked gasp. The heavy thud of multiple car doors slamming shut echoed from the driveway. Heavy boots crunched rapidly across the frozen concrete of the front walkway. The authorities Greg had planned to call to commit me had already arrived, but they were not driving an ambulance. The red and blue strobes painted the living room in chaotic, rhythmic flashes. The 50 guests, previously frozen in shock, began to scatter. They moved toward the edges of the room, pressing their backs against the walls, desperate to distance themselves from the epicenter of the destruction. The illusion of a sophisticated high society gathering evaporated, replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of a crime scene. A heavy, authoritative knock echoed from the front foyer. The sound vibrated through the hardwood floors. Police department, a voice boomed through the thick wood of the door. "Open up!" Greg remained paralyzed in the center of the room. His hands, previously raised in anger, dropped limply to his sides. The arrogance that fueled his existence was entirely absent, replaced by a profound, hollow panic. Brenda clutched the edge of the dining table. Her knuckles were white. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. I did not wait for Greg to move. I walked past him, my boots clicking softly on the floor. I crossed the foyer, reached out, and unlocked the heavy brass deadbolt. I pulled the front door open. The freezing Minnesota wind rushed inside, carrying the scent of exhaust fumes and fresh snow. Standing on the concrete porch were 4 uniformed patrol officers, their duty belts equipped with handcuffs and radios. Behind them stood Detective Miller, wearing a heavy winter parka over his rumpled dress shirt, and standing right beside the detective was my father. Jim held Leo securely against his chest, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. Jim looked at me, offering a single, subtle nod of confirmation. The extraction protocol was complete. Detective Miller stepped across the threshold, bypassing the coat rack. The uniformed officers filed in behind him, fanning out into the living room to secure the perimeter. The guests watched in terrified silence as the police took control of the environment. The detective stopped a few feet away from Greg. He reached inside his parka and produced a folded stack of official legal documents. The papers bore the embossed seal of a federal judge. Gregory Kelly and Brenda Kelly, Detective Miller announced, his voice carrying the practiced, unyielding authority of law enforcement. I have multiple felony warrants for your arrest. The charges include grand theft, financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit forgery. Brenda let out a high, reedy sound, like a bird caught in a snare. "This is a mistake," she gasped, stepping out from behind the dining table. "You do not understand. My daughter-in-law is having a psychiatric episode. She fabricated these documents. She is delusional. I demand you call a medical professional." Detective Miller did not look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Greg. We executed a simultaneous search warrant on the office of Derek Vance, 30 minutes ago, the detective stated flatly. We seized his notary logbooks, his digital servers, and his email archives. He surrendered immediately. He provided a full, sworn confession detailing his involvement in the fraudulent execution of the power of attorney and the quitclaim deed. The investigation is closed. You are both under arrest. The final pillar of their defense crumbled. Cousin Derek, the linchpin of their fraudulent network, had flipped on them to save himself. There would be no psychological evaluations. There would be no gaslighting the police. The hard evidence was secured. Officers, cuff them, Detective Miller ordered. 2 uniformed police officers stepped forward. One approached Greg, the other moved toward Brenda. "Wait," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking as the officer reached for her arm. "You cannot do this. I am hosting an event. My friends are here. This is a misunderstanding. Let me call my attorney." "You can call your attorney from the Precinct Processing Center, ma'am," the officer replied, his tone devoid of sympathy. "Please place your hands behind your back." Brenda looked around the room, her eyes wide with terror. She searched the faces of her charity board members and her high society colleagues. She was looking for an ally. She was searching for someone to defend her honor. But the women who had mocked my flour-dusted sweater in the kitchen hours earlier now stared at the floor. They refused to make eye contact. The social currency Brenda spent her entire life accumulating was instantly worthless. "I cannot go to jail looking like this," Brenda stammered, her vanity overriding her logic even as the metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. "Let me go upstairs. I need to wash my face. I need to grab my La Mer cream. The air in those cells is terribly dry." The officer tightened the cuffs, securing her arms behind her back. "No, ma'am," he said flatly. "You are not going anywhere except the back of my cruiser." While Brenda negotiated for skincare products, a loud, heavy mechanical grinding sound erupted from the driveway. The noise was deep and industrial, rattling the front windows. I turned and walked toward the glass panes facing the street. I looked out into the flashing lights. Behind the line of police cruisers, the massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck Jim had photographed that morning was backing into the driveway. The yellow beacon lights on the roof spun wildly. The driver, wearing a thick canvas jacket, jumped out of the cab. He did not ask for permission. He did not ring the doorbell. He walked straight to the rear of the Honda SUV parked near the garage. The tow truck driver unspooled a heavy steel cable from the winch. He crawled under the rear bumper of the Honda and secured the metal hooks to the undercarriage. He stood up, grabbed a remote control unit attached to the flatbed, and pushed a heavy rubber button. The hydraulic winch engaged with a loud whine. The steel cable pulled taut. The front tires of the Honda lifted off the frozen pavement. The vehicle was slowly, inexorably dragged up the steep metal ramp of the flatbed truck. Brenda saw the movement through the windows. She strained against the grip of the arresting officer. "What is he doing?" Brenda screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the living room. "Stop him! That is my car! I have the title! I need that car!" I stepped away from the window. I walked across the living room until I stood directly in front of her. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a small silver key ring holding 2 metal keys and a black plastic fob. I held the spare keys up, letting them dangle in the air between us. "You did not take my car, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and measured. "You took the liability." Her eyes widened in horror as the realization hit her. The vehicle was no longer an asset. It was the physical evidence of her crime. The Regional Credit Union had processed the fraud report I filed that morning. The moment the loan was flagged for identity theft, the bank initiated an immediate, aggressive repossession protocol to secure their collateral. She had pledged stolen property to finance her basement remodel. The bank was taking the car, and they were holding her personally accountable for the $40,000 balance. She stared at the keys dangling from my fingers. The crushing weight of her imminent bankruptcy settled over her features. Across the room, Greg was struggling against the officer attempting to secure his wrists. He managed to yank his right arm free for a fraction of a second. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his cell phone. His movements were frantic, driven by pure panic. I need to transfer funds, Greg yelled, his thumb frantically swiping across the cracked screen. I need to post bail. I need to retain legal counsel. He opened his mobile banking application. He bypassed the security prompt. The account dashboard loaded. I watched his face as he read the numbers on the screen. The primary joint account was locked. The Golden Horizons LLC ledger was frozen. The automated sweep protocols were dead. The only active balance was the manual transfer I had executed hours ago. His total available liquidity was exactly $1. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the hardwood floor for the second time that night. He stared at the screen, the glowing digital numbers reflecting the absolute zero of his financial existence. He was a man who built his identity on control and manipulation. Stripped of his leverage, he was nothing but a cornered animal. The officer grabbed Greg's arm, pulling it roughly behind his back. The metal handcuffs ratcheted tight, locking his wrists together. The sharp, mechanical click finalized the capture. As the officer began to march him toward the front door, Greg's panic mutated into desperate self-preservation. The loyalty he demanded from everyone else instantly evaporated when he faced consequence. This was her idea, Greg screamed, twisting his upper body to point a shackled finger directly at Brenda. She orchestrated the title forgery. She set up the LLC. I just signed the paperwork. She is the one who took the money. She manipulated me. Brenda halted in her tracks. The maternal devotion she weaponized against me vanished. She turned on her son with the vicious speed of a striking snake. You coward! Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing through the foyer. You drafted the custody petition. You forged the quitclaim deed for the house. It was your plan to institutionalize her. Do not try to pin this on me. You are a weak, pathetic man. They stood in the center of the hallway screaming accusations at each other. They traded felonies like bargaining chips, each trying to offer the other up to the detectives in exchange for leniency. The sophisticated, wealthy mother and the controlling, arrogant son were reduced to two criminals fighting over the scraps of a ruined conspiracy. Detective Miller watched the display with a look of profound disgust. He gestured to the officers. Get them out of here, the detective ordered. The police officers pushed them forward. Greg and Brenda were marched out the front door, their screams echoing across the snowy front lawn. They were loaded into the back seats of separate cruisers. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off the sound of their mutual betrayal. The guests began to file out quietly, retrieving their expensive coats from the rack. No one spoke to me. No one offered an apology. They simply fled the scene, desperate to erase their association with the disgraced family. Within 10 minutes, the house was entirely empty. The police cruisers pulled away from the curb, their red and blue lights fading into the dark Minnesota night. The heavy flatbed tow truck drove off, carrying the repossessed Honda SUV. I stood in the center of the living room. The silence rushed back in, filling the space left by the chaos. The front door opened. Jim walked inside carrying Leo. He kicked the snow off his boots and approached me. He did not say a word. He handed me my son. I pulled Leo tight against my chest. I buried my face in his soft, warm neck. For the first time since my right boot broke through the ice on County Road 9, I allowed myself to breathe. The cold, mechanical calculation of the auditor dissolved, leaving only the profound relief of a mother who had secured the perimeter. We were safe. The fortress was dismantled. The bank was closed. But the final audit was not yet complete. I still had to secure the foundation of our new life. The morning after the arrests, the sun rose over a quiet street. The flashing emergency lights were gone. The luxury vehicles belonging to the party guests had vanished. The heavy flatbed tow truck and the police cruisers were miles away. I stood in my kitchen holding a warm mug of tea, watching the winter light reflect off the pristine marble island. For the first time in a year, the house belonged to me. The air was still, but it no longer carried the suffocating weight of surveillance and psychological warfare. The battle was over, The cleanup had begun. The legal system moves with a slow, grinding momentum. It took several months for the federal prosecutors and the county district attorney to untangle the sheer volume of financial crimes Greg and Brenda had committed. But my 30-page evidence binder acted as a flawless roadmap. The cloud audio recordings, the reverse wire transfer logs, and the high-resolution scans of the forged signatures provided an airtight foundation for the indictment. In late spring, the defense attorneys requested a meeting. I sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room alongside my legal counsel. The opposing lawyers looked exhausted. They slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. It was a plea deal. Greg and Brenda were offering a guilty plea to a lesser misdemeanor charge in exchange for probation and a promise of financial restitution. They wanted to avoid a public trial that would broadcast their corruption to the remainder of their high society circle. I looked at the document. I thought about the plastic grocery bags wrapped around my freezing feet. I thought about the thermostat locked at 60 degrees. I thought about the custody petition designed to label me an unfit mother and steal my child. I pushed the paper back across the table. I did not negotiate. I instructed the prosecutor to proceed to a full criminal trial. Faced with the undeniable weight of the evidence and the prospect of facing a jury, their fragile alliance shattered permanently. Greg and Brenda turned the courtroom into a battleground of mutual betrayal. They testified against each other, each attempting to minimize their own culpability by shifting the blame. The judge watched their display of cowardice with unvarnished disgust. The sentencing was swift and definitive. Greg received 36 months in a state correctional facility for his role in the identity theft and the fraudulent power of attorney. Brenda, identified as the primary beneficiary of the financial pipeline and the architect of the corporate embezzlement, received a 60-month sentence. Cousin Derek did not escape the fallout. The county clerk revoked his notary commission permanently. The state regulatory board stripped him of his real estate brokerage license. He was handed a custodial sentence for accessory to felony fraud. The corrupt network they built to sustain their lifestyle was eradicated down to the bedrock. While the criminal courts handled the perpetrators, my civil attorney dismantled the paper trail they left behind. A family court judge reviewed the audio logs and the fabricated psychological profile. The judge issued an immediate permanent protective order awarding me sole, legal, and physical custody of Leo. The fraudulent quitclaim deed was invalidated and stricken from the county records. The title to the 2-story Craftsman house was scrubbed clean, registered solely and undisputedly under my name. The Regional Credit Union finalized their investigation into Golden Horizons, LLC. Because I had successfully pierced the corporate veil, the bank liquidated Brenda's remaining personal assets. They seized her primary residence to cover the defaulted $40,000 loan. The empire she built on my stolen wages collapsed into dust. A few weeks after the final gavel fell, I drove to the local supermarket. The weather had turned warm, the Minnesota snow replaced by green leaves and clear skies. I walked down the bright, fluorescent-lit aisles, pushing a shopping cart, with Leo sitting happily in the front seat. I turned into the baby care section. I stood in front of the formula display. My eyes scanned the shelves. On the lower rack sat the store-brand containers I used to buy. On the upper shelf, encased in premium packaging, sat the European organic brand Brenda had demanded I purchase. I reached up and took 2 cans of the organic formula. I placed them into my cart. They cost $20 more per unit. I did not buy them to appease a tyrannical mother-in-law. I did not buy them because I was forced to submit to a manufactured hierarchy. I bought them because I audited my life, recovered my capital, and restored my agency. I earn $85,000 a year, and I possess the unyielding freedom to spend my money however I choose. Purchasing the expensive brand was no longer a symbol of my oppression. It was a quiet, daily flex of my purchasing power. I returned home that afternoon. The environment inside my house was entirely transformed. I set the groceries on the counter and walked over to the wall-mounted smart thermostat. The digital display read a comfortable 72 degrees. There was no padlock icon in the corner of the screen. Warm air flowed freely from the ceiling vents. I walked into the living room. Resting on the glass shelf of the entertainment center was a brand new high-speed internet router. A sequence of green lights blinked steadily, providing a fast, secure connection to the outside world. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my mobile banking application. I scrolled down the ledger. My bi-weekly direct deposit had cleared that morning. The funds sat safely in the primary checking account. There were no automated sweeps. There were no phantom LLC transfers. Every dollar I earned remained securely in my possession. On Sunday evening, a familiar silver Ford truck pulled into my driveway. Jim did not park 3 blocks away in the shadows. He parked right in front of the garage in broad daylight. He stepped out of the cab, carrying a cardboard box filled with fresh pastries from a local bakery. He walked up the concrete steps, and I opened the front door to greet him. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where I had once performed a tearful, fabricated apology to lower the defenses of my captors. Now the table held roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, and the quiet, reliable warmth of genuine family love. We ate our meal in peace. There were no microaggressions about how I chopped the carrots. There were no arrogant lectures about my domestic duties. Jim spent the evening playing with Leo on the living room rug, building towers out of soft fabric blocks. I sat on the sofa watching my father and my son. The lingering adrenaline that had fueled my survival for the past year had finally faded, replaced by a deep, enduring tranquility. I thought about the people who used to occupy this space. I thought about the arrogance that blinded them. They built their entire strategy on a fundamental miscalculation. They looked at my quiet demeanor, my willingness to work long hours, and my initial reluctance to fight back, and they labeled me weak. They assumed my compliance was a permanent character flaw they could exploit forever. They believed that by cutting off my internet, locking the thermostat, and isolating me from my support system, they could rewire my reality. They thought taking the keys to my car would ground me, trapping me inside a perimeter they controlled. They thought taking my car meant I could not leave. But they forgot that I was the one paying for the road. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft twilight glow through the front windows. Jim stood up, brushed the dust from his jeans, and kissed Leo on the forehead. He gathered his coat, offered me a warm smile, and walked out to his truck. I stood in the open doorway, feeling the cool evening breeze. I watched the silver truck back out of the driveway and disappear down the quiet suburban street. I stepped back inside and closed the heavy wooden door. I reached out and turned the brass latch. The sharp, satisfying click of the new deadbolt echoed in the quiet foyer, locking out the past forever. I sit in the rocking chair inside the nursery, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my son. The midnight air is still. Moonlight filters through the frosted window pane, casting long, pale shadows across the wooden floorboards. Leo is wrapped in a knitted blanket, dreaming whatever small, quiet dreams belong to a child who has never known the bitter sting of betrayal. Looking down at his peaceful face, I find myself dissecting the invisible architecture of the household he was almost forced to inherit. When we talk about the American dream, we usually envision tangible milestones: a craftsman house with a wide porch, a reliable career, a dining table large enough to host holiday gatherings. We are taught to chase the aesthetic of a traditional family structure, believing that if the external picture looks flawless, the internal mechanics will naturally function. But a polished facade is the easiest thing in the world to manufacture. Real legacy is not written on property deeds or measured by the brand of infant formula sitting in the pantry. Real legacy is the psychological blueprint we hand down to our children. Brenda spent her entire life obsessed with building a dynasty based on dominance. She looked at her son Greg and did not see a boy who needed to learn empathy, accountability, or fairness. She saw an extension of her own ego. By shielding him from consequence, she starved him of the very friction required to build a moral compass. When a mother treats her child like a monarch, demanding the world bow to his whims, she does not raise a leader. She raises a predator. Greg learned to view human beings as expendable resources, because that is the exact behavior his mother modeled at the kitchen island. He watched her weaponize affection. He absorbed the lesson that love is a transaction, respect is synonymous with fear, and deceit is merely a tool for asset management. They performed the theater of a traditional family while hollowing out its core. In their pursuit of nice things and high society approval, they abandoned the fundamental duty of parenthood. They forgot that raising a child requires the courage to teach them how to fail, how to apologize, and how to respect the boundaries of others. My father, Jim, offered a masterclass in the exact opposite methodology. Jim never demanded obedience through intimidation. He did not solve my problems by treating me like a fragile, helpless victim. On the freezing afternoon he found me walking down County Road 9, he did not coddle me. He pulled his truck over, turned on the heater, and handed me the tools to fight back. He respected my intellect enough to let me map the extraction. He provided the logistics, the burner phones, and the quiet, unyielding presence of a man who knew his daughter was capable of dismantling her own prison. That is the profound responsibility of a parent. You do not shelter your children from the harsh realities of human nature. You teach them how to identify a bad ledger. You train them to trust their own instincts, to recognize the subtle shift in a room when control replaces care. Jim taught me that true strength is not enduring abuse with a stoic smile. True strength is having the emotional awareness to recognize an unacceptable environment and the tactical discipline to walk away from it. Now the duty of guiding the next generation rests in my hands. As I watch Leo sleep, I map the future I must build for him. He will grow up in a society that often confuses aggression with masculinity and equates financial success with personal virtue. It is my job to counter those toxic narratives. I must raise a boy who understands that vulnerability is a requirement for genuine connection. He needs to know that a true partnership is built on transparent honesty, not hidden agendas or forged signatures. I will teach him how to cook, how to clean, and how to share the domestic load, ensuring he never views another human being as his servant. More importantly, I will teach him the value of fairness. If he makes a mistake, he will learn the quiet dignity of a sincere apology. He will not be allowed to shift the blame or gaslight his peers. I want him to understand that his words have weight and his actions leave a permanent footprint on the lives of the people around him. I am breaking the cycle of entitlement right here in this quiet, warm room. The bloodline of manipulation ends with Greg. The new foundation starts with Leo. We share these reflections on Look Vengeance because the shadows hiding inside our homes thrive on silence. This channel exists to shine a harsh, necessary light on the toxic dynamics masquerading as family loyalty. We tell these stories to remind you that your autonomy is not a bargaining chip, and your peace of mind is not for sale. If you have ever looked across a dining room table and realized the people smiling at you are quietly plotting your erasure, you are not alone. Follow Look Vengeance. Join our community. Listen to the survival strategies of those who have audited their own lives and shut down the emotional thieves. The house is settling as the temperature drops outside. The hardwood floors creak a familiar, comforting sound of an old building shifting in the winter cold. I stand up from the rocking chair, pull the blanket a little higher over Leo, and walk out into the hallway. I pause near the staircase, looking down into the dark foyer. The heavy brass deadbolt remains locked. The perimeter is secure. But I know the real work is never truly finished. The vigilance required to maintain a healthy, honest life is a daily practice. We are all holding a pen, drafting the narrative our children will eventually read. Every interaction, every conflict resolved, and every boundary enforced writes another line in their internal guidebook. We must ask ourselves what kind of story we are leaving behind. When your children eventually look into the mirror as adults, will they see a reflection of your integrity, or will they spend their lives trying to unlearn your mistakes? The answer does not lie in the grand public gestures. It lives in the quiet, unseen moments behind locked doors where the true character of a family is forged.